Really hungry, and you better believe
Why do I have
that a hungry
emotes
bear
on?
is a very
I must
dangerous
have
bear
clicked
as well.
something. There we go.
And having
Hi.
something raid a few chicken coops or butcher a few hogs, that was one thing. But having the thing hunting the town's children, that
Work.
could not be
We gotta
tolerated.
work.
The most accomplished hunter
We all
in
gotta
Grapefield,
work.
a man named Rufus Robinson, volunteered to head out into the woods with his Australian shepherd. He'd said he'd come back with the beast's head, or he wouldn't be back at all.
I don't even know I clicked to that.
Later, Rufus's
Relatable.
Aussie shepherd came hobbling back into town all on its lonesome.
Can't just not work because I'm lazy.
Right over to Rufus's cabin.
I'm gonna finish the things.
On his porch, the dog went and laid down on his neighbors, almost like it knew that Rufus wasn't coming home. Folks said Rufus's dog might have run ahead, gotten itself lost, then simply walked back home to wait for his master. He'll be back in a few days, they said. Ain't no mangy bear got the better of old Rufus.
Already yawning.
With no
I woke up
head.
so late today because I actually been sleeping later recently again.
After him, unless its first and foremost task was hunting down the bear.
Usually I go to sleep at like 3, 4 a.m. But yesterday mom was like, since you're still awake, let's go grocery shopping. And I was like, okay, I guess I won't sleep then.
Well, according to a member of
it turns out I went to bed at like 11 a.m.
Than 24 hours
I woke up at 5 p.m.
that had been stalking the town's children. And it wasn't no bear. One night they set up a real simple trap. Just laid some fresh meat as bait out in the open, and then all they had to do was wait. Well, they waited, and they waited, but nothing showed. Then just when someone gets up, I need to remember that this one
hasn't actually paid for the extra expressions yet.
The man who approached the meat.
But you're on the same layer again.
Before he managed to stick a knife in the thing.
What time did you shop? We shopped at
his hunting buddies emptied almost every
4 a.m. plus, and then we finished shopping at around close to 5 a.m. We went to eat McDonald's breakfast because we have. I have a McDonald's right beside the grocery shop.
It was a man.
So we went to eat at McDonald's, and then I had to stay awake because by the time we get home, and then if I go and shower and all that, it's going to be very close to my medicine taking time, and you can't miss the timing to take hormone pills. So I just stayed awake until 10:30 for my hormone pills. I only went to sleep at 11.
His spine was arched and contorted. His hands and feet
4 a.m. shopping. You know what? Shopping late at night is like the best because there's nobody around. There's nobody around. It's great.
Seen anything quite like it, so they dragged the man's body out of the woods, then woke up the town's doctor to come inspect their quarry. Now, this doctor had been Grapefield's resident physician for the better part of 50 years. He treated everyone in town that had lived there since the 1870s, including the
I watched Hatsune Miku movie. How was it?
It was him that realized
maybe I can't really sleep well either, and if I don't sleep, I get a headache. How do you deal with it? Usually, I tell my friends if you have insomnia, and you can't fall asleep, you should just lay in bed and keep your eyes closed anyways. Because apparently, right? Apparently that's still resting. It's like better than not sleeping at all. Just closing the eyes and laying there is better than nothing.
Made up the mob had to space themselves out real wide to cover all the angles. One man, stationed just off the east wing,
I take nap, but it can be random times. It could be like 8 to 10 p.m. or 1 to 3 a.m. At least you take naps.
His skin all scorched.
I don't think that's fully healthy, but at least there's naps.
Besides, he was so better than that there was nothing. No way that he'd survive more than a day or two out there in the woods all alone. So instead of filling him full of lead, like they did with the others who tried to escape, the man let the boy go.
Yesterday,
no idea that in decades to come,
I didn't do anything yesterday because Bork invited me to play a game.
No one knows how the boy survived out in the woods
but in the end, he went back to sleep.
To live out in the trails of Appalachia instead of
I didn't do anything.
Settle down any place. Most suspect that the grief of losing
I guess technically all I did was I added the iPhone blend chips to my Vroid model, and that was it.
On how he came to look the way he did. Obviously, the scars were present all over his body, being from the fire. But what wasn't so clear was how the boy had come to be so comfortable running on all fours like some type of dog. Some said that he must have been born that way, and his appearance was probably why he couldn't settle down anymore. They figured that since he got treated like a monster, he started acting like one too. But others said that he was perfectly healthy, and that in slowly losing his humanity, he learned to run and hunt like an animal. Honestly,
Star
I don't know what to make
Eyes.
of any of this, and neither did my grandpa. He always thought it was some myth or legend, until his own ma and pa confirmed.
What game he wanted to play? Traveler's Rest.
The
one where you own a tavern.
And since they couldn't stand another one, they decided to move.
I mean, it's a tavern. It counts as a tavern, I think.
Murder if the hunters were just defending themselves.
Movie is good. I skipped the story in the game. You know, honestly, I played that game for a little bit. I also skipped the story.
That the boy never really
You've seen it? Yeah, that game.
That night. How he was probably wandering around the woods, living like an animal, never truly being a person. Whether he came back to Grapefield for revenge or just to revisit the place he grew up, killing him meant finishing off a murder that started 30 or 40 years earlier. And that's why people say the town is cursed. Not because there's some evil spirit lurking around the place, but because those who came before condemned those who came
I'm
after.
playing in JP's server, also that's one of it, so I couldn't understand shit. I'm weeb, so I kinda understand shit, but I'm the type who's lazy to read the story.
Martin, or as we call her around here, the girl who married
Honestly speaking,
Willa May lived with her husband in
like it's like you need a certain amount of patience to
young
sit through
married at 17 in
a game stories.
Once Willa May realized that she was pregnant,
And sometimes I don't have that
home together,
that patience.
For at least a little while, they were happy. But tragically, around halfway through the pregnancy, Willa May lost the baby, and unfair as it was, Alden, her husband, never forgave her for it. He blamed Willa May for the miscarriage, saying she didn't take care of herself properly, and accused her of not loving him anymore. He couldn't deal with the grief, so he drank, and when he drank, he beat Willa May something terrible. And after a while, the only thing Willa May liked about her husband was the fact that he worked as an oil driller down in Texas. That meant that he worked 2 weeks on and 2 weeks off, which for Willa May meant 2 weeks of heaven, followed by 2 weeks of hell.
I only have that patience in Genshin main story. If it's not main story, I don't bother shit.
Every so often to keep an eye on her. He did as he asked, stopping by.
Honestly, wished they allow you to skip story in Genshin.
But after a while,
cause I like the game, right?
Unmarried, began to wonder why.
But I don't play. I hate playing dailies.
He talked to her sometimes and asked
like
her
whether it's any kind of game. It doesn't matter what kind of game. I hate having to go in daily.
She broke down and told her
okay,
everything.
and keeping up with like story and stuff. I only play games when I feel like it, right?
Silas did his best to comfort poor
So,
May, and then one thing led to another. They ended up falling in love.
Genshin, they don't allow you to skip
for as long as they could,
at all.
But while spirits were strong, their flesh was weak.
And then you need so much time to go through the story. So I was like, nah, I like your game, but nah, that's so tiring. It's so tiring.
Alden went on down to Texas to work for 2 weeks, and then after spending a few days packing up her things and planning her escape with her new beau, Willa May sat down to write Alden a letter. Word has it, she gave him both barrels in that old letter of hers, told him what a piece of trash he was, how she'd never really loved him, and how she'd see him in hell. She then grabbed her bags, then rode a wagon all the way to Bean Station just over 12 miles away. When Willa May arrived at Bean Station,
some part is not voiced anyways, I might as well skip. But they don't allow you to skip, right? And you have to like
Silas couldn't
click
the last
like mad
until the next day, at which point
to get it to like
have enough money to survive
go faster.
For a while once they'd made it to California. Silas put Willa May up in a cheap hotel, then said that he'd meet her at the train station the very next morning with all the cash they needed to start a new life together. The next morning,
but honestly, right?
Got dressed, then headed to the station to meet Silas.
Shouldn't play
when she
any
arrived, she saw
gacha
him
games
on the platform for her,
cause I get tempted.
His favorite felt hat and jacket. But
I always get tempted.
And the figure turned,
so the safest is for me to not play it at all.
But rather her husband, Alden Martin, wearing her brother's
clothes. Goddamn, when I was playing Genshin, when I was still working, I spent so much money on that freaking game.
No longer required. He could come back in 2 weeks and try his luck then, but for the time being, he'd have to head back up to Appalachia and try to make do with
it's crazy. I don't trust myself.
Then caught an overnight train back up to Tennessee, then caught another to Bean
play free to play friendly one. I think Once Human is pretty free to play friendly.
Hotel room, dreaming of life married to Silas.
But I also don't play it every day.
Back home, reading the both.
I don't play that game every day.
She'd written just the night before. The only
Once Human is a gacha game. It has gacha in it.
Assumption her husband wouldn't return.
It actually has gacha in it.
Willa May told him exactly what she and his brother were planning to do, along with exactly when she was planning to do it. Because, after all, why not?
Good thing I stopped spending in Genshin. I think I stopped.
California, a detail she
I did stop, but I also already spent so much money in that game. I even uninstalled it. I didn't even install it on this OS PC. And then I tried the Infinity Nikki like for 1 day, and then I stopped touching it as well. I think I also tried Wuthering Waves. I tried Wuthering Waves for 1 day as well, and then I tried Zenless Zone Zero. Zenless Zone Zero, I played it for a week, and then I uninstalled it too.
She screamed, cried, and bucked, but Alden was stronger. He dragged her to the yard outside his brother's home.
If you uninstall it
wife to gaze upon the body
quick enough, you won't spend money on it.
From the beams
That's
of the porch.
It's totally how it works.
Alden told her, "Go, and remember."
Okay, it's totally how it works.
Not me. He then rode back into Bean's station and handed himself into the sheriff.
Gacha game is not my thing anymore. I just don't want to spend money. I still buy games, right? Occasionally when there's like a sale and I really want like a game, I still buy games. So it's not that I don't spend money anymore, but I don't wanna go crazy in gacha games anymore, you know?
Until the night after his brother's hanging.
Cause I go crazy. I go crazy.
Pulled back a sheet to see what it contained.
Especially when there's like a character I like. And that's not healthy for Ma wallet.
With a wedding band wrapped around one of his cold, dead fingers.
Maybe if I'm a millionaire. It feels so sad to get overpowered just by spending. I mean, there are games that are gacha, but you don't get overpowered even if you spend. But I get what you mean. Recently, gacha games is just you want to get even more powerful, you gotta spend money. Get the stronger characters.
Is an example of extraterrestrial visitation. Yet fewer are familiar with another Appalachian legend, which, after some research, might just be rooted in a very unsettling truth. In certain parts of southern and eastern Appalachia, some folks still talk of an eerie nocturnal race of
just buy games.
Known as the moon.
Those that you pay for, and you never ever have to do any microtransactions at all.
Ghostly bodies and
hence why I often quit those games after a while. Yeah.
They're mostly harmless.
Yeah, technically free, but
due to their general fear of humanity. You'll go walking on the trails where the moon is big and bright, and you might just spot a moon-eyed person bathed in silvery light.
Soon you'll buy games, yes.
The moon-eyed people sound like nothing but a quaint.
There's no way that I don't buy games.
But like many so-called myths and legends, there can be varying degrees of truth to them. And in the case of
I get to play also. Not wrong, since you're in the family.
Prior to the removal of 1838, North Georgia and other parts of the Appalachians were still part of the Cherokee Nation.
It's okay.
And in 1782,
if I buy those games and you guys play it right, it also means that it's money well spent.
Sevier paid a visit to the Cherokee chief Oconostota at Fort Mountain, who had recently reached the ripe old age of 90 years old. Given
it's also money well spent.
Governor, Sevier and Oconostota dedicated a great deal of their discussion to local politics. Sevier sought the old chief's wisdom, yet he also sought his experience, and before long, the conversation turned to history. Sevier and Oconostota began discussing the origins of the Cherokee, with the old chief describing how his people had migrated to Appalachia from the northern Great Lakes region. Oconostota claimed his ancestors had arrived to find
recently I've been considering getting
fortress. Hence
I think it was Super Mario RPG, because I wanted to play that game, right?
But eventually they prevailed,
but I didn't want to spend the full price getting the game, because if you buy it, Singapore don't have a Nintendo online store. So if I want to buy games online, I actually use like a Canadian account, because Canadian is cheaper than USD. But I don't really want to spend that money, because I think those kind of Nintendo games in the Canadian money is always like $79.90, so that's like 80 Canadian dollars, okay? But recently I went to check, and that's like this store that sells, you know, pre-owned Switch games, right? And it's $29. And that's not bad. So I'm considering it. I'm like, do I want it that badly? $29 isn't that expensive. So I'm considering it. Just emulate the game, then what is my Switch there for? What is my Switch there for? Aren't we getting Nintendo shops soon?
Despite Chief Oconostota's
death,
rumors of the Moon-Eyed people did not abate.
In
fact, almost every band of Appalachian Cherokee were familiar with the legends.
My brother is considering getting Switch 2, because his Switch Lite is dead. Somehow his Switch Lite is dead. I think it's okay to homebrew Switch soon, since Switch 2 is coming out. I have no idea how to homebrew shit. It was announced in Nintendo Direct. I didn't watch that. I watched the Switch 2 thing, but only that, only about Switch 2, because I wanted to know what's the difference, right? Not that I plan to get Switch 2, because my Switch is still working fine, so I won't get Switch 2, even if they're like, oh, if you get Switch 2, the gameplay more advanced or some shit. I don't plan to. Maybe like 3 years later. I think 3 years later, my Switch will probably die. Maybe 3 years later.
The book includes excerpts of an interview with a U.S. Army colonel named Leonard Marbury. Fluent in the Cherokee language,
also, like, I think because of the backlash from the prices of Nintendo Switch 2, they turned the price back down, but still, okay, when I first saw about the price, I was like, what the fuck, okay? Because they wanted to charge $80-$90 for one game. One Nintendo game. That's insane. That's insane. And the Switch 2 is more expensive too. So you pay extra for Switch 2. And then you pay even more for the games. For one game. One game. That's insane.
French settlers. The Cherokee had sometimes described the Moon-Eyed people.
Yeah, $80 for a game. That's insane.
Alien or unfamiliar weaponry. Yet when Dr. Barton interviewed one frequent visitor,
I think if the console stops being produced, it's okay to emulate games. Honestly speaking, right, I don't care if people emulate games. It's just that since I have a Switch, right, I want to buy the game cartridge so that I can play it wherever I am at. And the only reason why I want to get a game cartridge is because my brother has switched also. So if I get the game cartridge, we can share. If not, he has to use my account to play my online games.
Born in the Irish county of Antrim in
Who's going to get a GBA now? I still have my GBA, but it's dead. I mean, obviously it's dead. I didn't charge it for so long, and I had it since I was in primary school. Obviously it's dead.
Entirely cut off from the outside world.
You can family share. No. Family share. Right? Does family share not require you to buy that Nintendo Online bullshit thing?
Titling the book A History of the American Indians.
Or did they change it?
The book cemented Adair's status as one of the most knowledgeable Indian experts of his generation, hence why he was sought out by the author B.R. Carroll. And when asked
I would say, like, if we get family share, it would be great for me, because if my brother buy a game, I can play. But then again, he's not the type to really buy games. I'm the type to buy games. He don't really buy games. It's me. I'm the problem, or I'm the issue.
It was the consistency with
I'm the issue for my own wallet.
Each and every tribe spoke of the moon-eyed people being stunted, nocturnal, and incredibly pale. And what's more, most tribes agreed that the cause of their malformation was that they chose to live underground.
You know, to be honest, before I got myself my Switch, I had told my brother for so many times and for so long. I think it was like I've been mentioning it to him for more than a year or something, about how, oh my god, I really wanna. Back then it was I really wanted to play Super Mario Odyssey. That game. You know, the one where Mario has the head thing. I really wanted to play that game. I told my brother, I want to Switch because I really want to play that game.
When they discovered evidence of a human
you throw heads, yes.
When a section of this skull was sent away for analysis,
but I didn't buy Switch for the longest time because, first of all,
the skull must have belonged
consoles aren't cheap. Right? They aren't cheap, and it's not like I have a lot of extra money. Okay, it's not cheap. The game itself isn't cheap, so I was like, I really want it, but I didn't wanna, or rather, I didn't have the extra money to get it, and I think I finally got it after reselling some of my things. By some of my things, I mean character designs, because I used to buy a lot of character designs. So I resold the popular ones that I don't use anymore, and then I had the money to buy a Switch, and that's how I got my Switch. What? Amazing.
If the Cherokee did indeed migrate to Appalachia around 12,000 years ago,
I want to Switch for Pokemon games. It is fun. But it's
frighteningly feasible that they encountered a prehistoric race of subhuman cave dwellers against whom they waged a terrible and ultimately genocidal war.
I'm looking forward to the new Pokemon game. And they say, like, if you have I think Switch 2 and the first Switch, the gameplay would be a little bit,
and became even more cautious.
I wouldn't say different, but there's some difference.
The stories of
I have no investment to sell. See, I had investments.
Stories,
except some of them don't really get sold.
Yet to fully explain.
Only the popular ones are easier to resell.
And her kin were discovered in 2003.
The ones that are not as popular is hard to resell. So it's like
origins.
Is it really a good investment? It's not. Okay, but back then I really like collecting original characters, and I hate my own design, so I just like, I'll get those. I'll get those.
We weren't too hardcore about it.
But that was I remember there's this one there was this one character that I really liked. Okay, I still own the character.
At one point.
Right, but I didn't have money to get it, because when the character was being sold, it was being sold for like $90, $90 USD.
Because they'll know what we didn't walking into town.
It
was. How there
was.
isn't a drop of alcohol for sale in that whole goddamn county.
It's this guy.
To stop in a dry town, meaning we had access to all the snacks, but none of the booze. And while we were at the store,
this guy
behind the counter said that we'd have
this guy is $90.
If we wanted to buy any.
But I didn't have $90. You can see he's like in 2017.
Nice,
I didn't have $90.
Some up for us if they were already
so I posted about it. Back then it was DeviantArt only, right? I posted about it. I was like, I'm offering you this amount of art if you pay me $90 so that I can get this character. And somebody who really liked my art got the offer. So I managed to get this character. I have quite a lot of art of him as well.
So me and my buddy decided to ask him if he could give us a ride or something. And
lucky, right? Lucky.
As a thank you. So we
pay me to get my art so that I can get my character.
The guy seems friendly enough and didn't seem too keen.
And that was one of the rare occasions where I immediately spent the money that I got. Because, you know, gotta grab the character before he gets bought by somebody else.
Which was the home of the nearest liquor store.
I can sell my Valor account for a Switch price, a Switch 2 price, or a Switch 1 price.
We got to talking about
Switch 1 has a difference too. You want the original Switch 1 or you want the OLED Switch 1?
At which point, we'd have lost all of our daylight and finding a place to camp would be a
very
real
different
pain in the butt. We mentioned this to him and he seemed to have a sort of flash of inspiration. He knew of another place we could buy booze, but seeing as it was a dry county, it wasn't strictly legal either. He asked if we were cops, and we laughed when we said no. And he then asked if we were okay buying Shine instead of just beer. Now at this point I should explain why this got us so excited. By Shine, the guy obviously meant moonshine, which was something we talked about at length before we even stepped on the trails.
Oh, that price. That's not bad.
One thing, but
then your Valor will be gone.
Genuine homemade moonshine.
Why do people buy Valor account? Is it because you have like cosmetics and stuff?
In Germany,
I'm attached to my account. How much do you really want a Switch? That's what you have to ask yourself.
Anyone in their right mind would couple that with a good locally made rum.
Do you want a Switch so much that you would sell your Valor account for it?
The chance to enjoy some genuine locally made liquor, because when in Rome, you know? That's why when this dude said that he'd drive us over to
it's just for the cosmetics, I see.
To buy moonshine, we just
once I'm desperate enough.
Anyway.
No. But you need to make sure that you have like enough money to get both a Switch and a Switch game, you know? You gotta keep in mind the game price as well.
When we arrived at the
how much is your Valor account? How do you guys know how much your Valor account is?
In fact,
you calculate
what the place was almost instantly. The building itself almost looked like a community center or something.
Is the cosmetics really rare?
Way bigger than most that we'd seen out in those parts too. But the thing that really clued us into what we were looking at was the big row of motorcycles outside. My little
go carousel and price check?
Like he had all the box sets and
Riot against your total expense on the game. Oh, okay.
So right away I knew what I was looking at. We were at a motorcycle club's clubhouse.
That's nice.
It was pretty awesome seeing this actual clubhouse right there in front
I wish
of us,
gacha games would tell me how much I spent on their game.
Or something. We were still under the impression that our new friend would just go in and buy the Shine for us while we got to sit in the truck. So when he got out of the truck and told us to follow him inside, we both are like, are you sure about that? I'm not going to object to strangers in their clubhouse? But our new friend said no, it'd be fine, and they wouldn't mind at all so long as we were respectful, etc. And so, in we went. And while there wasn't any kind of branding on the outside of the building,
usually 20 plus skins is $100 to $200.
They had the name of their club everywhere. And while I'm not about to reveal what that was for reasons that'll become obvious,
how do you get cosmetics? You just have to play a lot, and you get it for free.
Pictures and antiques and stuff. And I mean, it'd be pretty cool of an experience walking into a bar like that if it wasn't for the record scratch moment when we walked in. The second we walked in, all these big, hairy biker dudes just stop what they're doing and turned to look at us. Our new friend asks if the prez is around, which I'm assuming means the club's president. And when told that he was in his office, our new buddy tells us to take a seat at the bar.
You have to buy in battle, so
we do as we're told, but
you spend money.
Drinks or anything. There's just all these dudes and a few chicks standing around, looking at us like, what the hell are you two thinking about walking into a place like this? Our new buddy walked off down a hallway, then after knocking on what must have been the door to the president's office, he walks inside and disappears. Both my buddy and I aren't saying a word, but we're looking at each other like
there are limited ones and there is not.
Idea. Everyone in there.
So the limited ones would be
said to one guy like
more sought after then.
Fine. And he says nothing to me in reply. Just grips a pool cue like he's imagining it's my neck and carries on staring at me. I was right on the verge of just being like, we'll just go ahead and wait outside. Sorry for the intrusion. When we suddenly heard yelling coming from down the hall.
Because it's
so loud we could hear
it doesn't come back at all, so it's truly limited. Unlike those other games that tell you it's limited and then they come back almost immediately.
Fat bald dude following quickly behind.
There's some account that purely sells champions.
His butt the entire way down the hallway, stomping him at first, but then dragging him to his feet and smacking him around while screaming all kinds of stuff like, "You dumb."
Champs are like once a year skin. Oh.
You bring them in here and expect us to. I should drag you back and blow your head off, you rat. And my buddy and I get off our bar stools and head towards the way we came in. But another biker dude stands in our way and is like, "You two aren't going anywhere." So right then, in my head, I'm thinking that
every year is different design.
The office announced that he'd brought two strangers to the clubhouse
truly
to buy
limited
moonshine, and the club's president had freaked out on him. We knew it had been a risky move to just walk in and ask, but we also figured our new friend was connected enough for that.
I have 3 limited skin.
Otherwise, why bother risking it in the first place?
I guess that's value in your account.
But then apparently, the president had not taken it well, and it seemed it was us that were about to pay the price too. So as I said, one of the other bikers had stepped in our way and wouldn't let us leave, right? So we just had to stand there and watch our new friend getting smacked around until he finally turned his attentions to my buddy and I. And right away, I start saying things like, "We're so sorry, we had no idea. He told us it was cool, we didn't know," and all this other stuff. But then instead of just beating us right there, the president points towards the door and tells us both, "Get the F out." I remember feeling relief at first, like this sort of lucky, relieved feeling at the idea that he was just going to let us go. But then, at the same time, I'm not the kind of person to just walk off and leave someone in trouble, and neither was my friend. Every fiber of my being wanted to just walk out of that door, run like hell. But there was also this voice in my head saying, if you just leave that guy here, after he put his butt on the line to get you booze, you are the lowest form of scumbag imaginable. I still feel like that might hold true. It's just that that's not what happened at all. So the big biker guy stepped out of our way so we could leave, but then I say, "What about our friend there? What's going to happen to him?" And the president says, "He's not your friend." I'm still very much in the dark, so I try appealing to the guy's conscience or whatever, telling him he was just trying to help us. But the president yells back, "Help you? He was robbing you. Now get out of here while you still have a chance." And I couldn't believe it. Well, at the time I couldn't, but now it obviously makes way more sense to me. But what I still can't get my head around is the fact that those bikers kind of had our back in a way. I guess when the president was asking something like, "Are you trying to get us busted?" he didn't mean that we might be undercover cops or whatever. He meant that robbing and maybe even killing us would bring way more heat down on them than just selling a little moonshine so they could pay to patch the leaks in the clubhouse roof or something. But anyway, once we realized our new friend was in fact out to get us, we dropped him like a live hand grenade and then got the hell out of there just like the president had told us. A few years back, I was hiking the Appalachian Trail with a few friends of mine, and We ended up stopping at a campsite that had comfort stations and all of that. One night I woke up at around 2 in the morning and needed to use the bathroom. The site was one of those corner sites, so there was a really short trail at the back of the site which led through the woods before you get to the lights where the washroom is. I guess I could have gone around the front, but I figured that I would just cut through there like I usually do to save time because I was tired and needed to pee real bad. So as I'm passing the middle of the trail, I hear a very faint noise coming from my right, something that sounded almost like laughing. I didn't freak out or anything. Like I know raccoons and porcupines make something like a sort of tee-hee-hee sound at night. And I couldn't see anything like a raccoon or a porcupine, but it was dark, so why would I? I just kept going towards the comfort station without a second thought. But then a few seconds later, I hear a voice deep in the woods. A woman's voice asking, "Hello?" To say I jumped was an understatement. But then, I was just startled, Not scared at all, but I also didn't know what to say in response, or if this girl was talking to me or someone else entirely. I ended up just saying, "Hey," in like a sort of friendly voice, because if some girl was freaking out hearing footsteps in the middle of the night, I didn't want her to think that I was some kind of creeper. But then after I said hey and there was no response, and that's the point that I started to get a little bit freaked out. Once I was at the comfort station, I did my business and managed to talk myself out of having a serious case of the creeps. I don't believe in ghosts or anything like that, and I still don't, to be honest, and although the timing and sudden silence had been fairly creepy, I knew that worst case scenario, it was just a person that was probably as spooked as I was. Anyway, so I started heading back the way I came, thinking, if I heard anything this time, I'm just going to sprint. But I'm getting further and further along the trail, and it's as quiet as the grave out there. I'm maybe 75% of the way along the trail, thinking to myself, I hope I didn't scare that girl too bad, when I hear her voice again. Only it's not her voice. It just sounded like her voice, but it was different in a way that made my skin want to crawl right off my body when it said, "Come back." And I think that was the fastest I've ever ran in my entire life. I beat feet like an athlete and threw myself back into my tent so frantically that I woke everybody up. They kept asking what was wrong, and all I could say was, I think I just freaked myself out is all. There was no way in hell they'd believe me if I told them what I'd heard. They'd think that I was drunk, high, or just a little baby man, or maybe a little of all three. But they would not believe that I heard a voice change in a way that it did. It sounds crazy, but I actually hoped that they would hear it at some point, but we moved campgrounds that...
Every time I listen to this kind of stories, I'm like, you just encountered something strange and you're not gonna tell anybody else?
I just wish that I knew what I heard that night.
What if you all die because of it?
That question didn't keep me up.
No communication.
Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted to all future narrations.
Really a coward thing to do if you just tell your friends like, hey, I think I heard somebody else out there.
Sundays and Wednesday nights. If you get a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/letsreadofficial, or over email at letsreadsubmissions@gmail.com, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all your future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks offered for members of the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories in big compilations, remastered and sounding awesome, every Tuesday at noon, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. All links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends. And remember, Joel for President 2924. By 2014, my friend Lewis and I had been hiking buddies for years. And we went through the forest of Washington and Oregon together, baked ourselves to a crisp in the deserts of the Southwest, and scaled the peaks of the Sierra Nevada side by side. But next on our list was the Frank Church River of No Return Wilderness, or the Frank as everyone calls it. We planned to hike in, camp out, and see what the place had to throw at us. We loaded up the car, drove north from California to Idaho, and set out for what was supposed to be a straightforward long-haul trip. The drive took 2 days of heading up the I-5, then east into Idaho's interior, and then before long, we saw the Frank's 2 million acres sprawled out ahead of us. A chunk of land so big that it dwarfed anything we'd tackled before. We parked at a trailhead near the middle fork of the Salmon River, in a gravel lot with a faded sign warning about bears and fire bans, and then pulled our packs out from the trunk. They were really heavy, but seeing as they contained our food, our tent, our sleeping bags, our water filters, and much, much more, they were our entire lives at that moment. The first day we stuck to the trail, moving steadily through the pine and trees, and the forest was very quiet, but it was kind of a gentle quiet, and we managed to make it around the 8 miles before we ended up camping near a creek at dusk. And day 2 was pretty much more of the same. We pushed deeper into the woods. The trail was winding through the valleys and up ridges as the underbrush started to get thicker, and it was swallowing up the path entirely in certain spots. We didn't talk much. We just walked, ate some trail mix, and checked out our maps every so often to make sure that we were headed in the right direction. At the end of the day, we pitched the tent on a flat patch of ground, boiled water for these instant noodles that we had, and then pretty much slept like the dead. 18 miles in, the Frank felt like hours. We felt dialed in, and we were ready for more. On the third day, we started to feel a little restless, for want of a better word. Trails were fine for tourists, but we'd come for something real. So when Lewis suggested that we ditch the path and cut cross-country and see what most people missed, I didn't argue. We veered off the trail, and the change was almost instant. The woods turned very dense, with trunks wider than my shoulders and roots that started to sprawl out like veins under the dirt. Moss was pretty much draped on everything, starting to dull the light of
You
the
lost
sun
mobile data?
and carpeting the
What do you mean
forest
by you
floor
lost
so
mobile
thick that it
data?
was almost like sponge under our feet.
No more mobile
We moved a
data.
little slower,
All your
avoiding
data
rabbit
dead.
holes and scrambling over fallen logs, and while it made for much rough going, it truly was worth it. The place felt completely untouched, like we traveled back in time by almost 1,000 years. Then at one point, Lewis suddenly stops and tilts his head to the side like he'd heard something.
Yes, roaming? Oh no.
A second later,
Why
I
do you
caught it
use
too.
all your data watching
The slow
a stream where I don't
steady
even
and
talk that much?
Very out of place. It wasn't the wind or running water. It sounded artificial, almost mechanical. And me and Lewis didn't say anything to each other. We just obeyed our sort of mutual curiosity and followed that noise. The sound grew louder as we pushed forward, then, after a few minutes, we broke through this thicket of saplings and saw it. A bunker, sunk into a low rise. A steel door was crooked in the frame, and its concrete shell appeared to be covered in scratched symbols. Circles, zigzags, or lines that twisted
lagging.
into
Why are you
nothing
lagging?
recognizable. And the hum came from inside, and once we were close enough, we could hear that it was some kind of heavy metal, all distorted and screaming vocals. It was then that I saw the door hung almost ajar, just an inch, but enough to allow the noise inside to spill out. Lewis and I stopped dead in our tracks just a few feet short of the bunker's door. The music was aggressive and violent, either death metal or some kind of hardcore, but it wasn't the kind of music that had us approaching with such caution. It was the thought of the people playing it inside. Lewis shot me this look. I mean, sure, there was a chance that it was just a bunch of metalheads throwing a party in some old abandoned metal bunker. But what if it wasn't just that, you know? What if they were way out in the middle of nowhere for a reason? And I remember looking back at Lewis and gently leaning my head back in the direction we'd come as if to say, let's get out of here. And he nodded, then we turned to leave. We were aiming to put miles between us and that place before dark, and neither of us wanted to find either who was down there or what they were doing. But we'd only gone a few hundred yards before they found us. We were walking along discussing who in the hell would build a bunker way out in the middle of nowhere, when two men stepped out from the tree line like they'd been waiting for us. They were wearing full camo, with faces hidden behind balaclavas, and each held a rifle that looked like something.
It's fine.
Like
Is it though?
Barrels were down.
Don't you have to pay extra when you need extra roaming data?
My blood turned to ice.
You need to recharge? You're roaming?
I could hear him breathing beside me, and I knew that he was sizing them up the same as I was.
Are you using like a prepaid plan?
They just stood there for a second, eyes locked on us through those slits in their masks, with the hum from that bunker faintly audible through the trees behind us. And then suddenly, one of them raised their rifle. "On your knees," he said. "Arms up." His voice was flat, cold, and there was no room for debate. I looked at Lewis. His hands were moving toward his pack straps. Counting the people back in the bunker, we were obviously outnumbered, and considering our pistols were still in our packs, we were incredibly outgunned.
It has a 15 gigabyte that doesn't expire.
I started to ease my arms up, buying time when Lewis moved.
I always use postpaid plans, so
took off running.
Never had that issue.
The thought of it hitting the ground snapped me out of that daze of fear that had come over me, and then yanked my own straps free, ditching that weight, and bolted after him. As we ran, a shot cracked out overhead loud enough to make my ears ring. The bark exploded off a tree to my left, showering me with splinters. I ducked, legs pumping, weaving in and out of the tree trunks as I followed Lewis, and then behind me I heard someone yelling, "Cease fire, we need them alive." After hearing that, I thought that they'd ease up, but maybe only a few seconds later more shots started coming.
It's fine for you?
Lower now, kicking up the dirt around my feet. They weren't aiming to kill. They wanted us to
waste your data on watching stream.
Back. My lungs were burning, but I kept going. Lewis was ahead of me, dodging tree trunks.
This 15 gigabytes can last for more than 2 months? Oh.
The gunfire
okay, that's not
at one point, but we kept
that bad.
I didn't know how
if it can last that long.
It had to have been a mile or two, but eventually we stopped. My legs were shaking. My chest was heaving as Lewis braced against a tree. We checked to see if there was anything behind us. There was
That's how I already go out.
Shots, no shouts, just the wind.
It's okay. It's all good.
We'd lost the men shooting at us, but we'd also lost our packs, meaning all of our food, gear, and maps were now in their hands.
I used to pay so much for my phone
one of the worst
because I wanted a good amount of data for when I go to work and stuff. And I can, like, you know, watch streams, I can watch YouTube on the way there, because it takes an hour from me to get from my house to work, and from work back home, it takes an hour. So I was like, I need entertainment, I need data, and in the past it's so goddamn expensive.
I kept my eyes open, expecting those men to creep up on us in the dark with their rifles ready.
Now I'm using
Lewis barely slept
a plan from a newer telecom company. I mean, they've been around for a while now, but they're considered newer, because in the past I was using one of the older companies that's been around for a long time. But their plans are freaking expensive. So I swapped over to this one, and now I only need to pay $10 a month. Last time I had to pay like $70 a month.
We eventually used
which is insane.
To peek through the trees, and we started moving south and towards the car.
I accepted it because I was working, but $70 is expensive, man.
And the forest just stretched on, swallowing every sound but just our footsteps, and my boots were rubbing.
Yeah, I used to pay $70 a month.
And we walked all day, stopping only to scoop water from some stream with our hands. Night eventually came again.
I paid $4 USD for this 15 gigabytes. Back then,
light a fire, as that was probably too
even
risky.
back then, okay, they upgraded, they quote unquote upgraded my plan, okay, because back then, even though I was paying $70 a month, every month I didn't even get 100 gigabytes. I'm saying 100 gigabytes because right now I pay $10, okay? And its original plan is you pay $10 and you get 100 gigabytes of data. I think they recently upgraded it, so I have 200 gigabytes of data. I can't even finish 100 gigabytes, but they upgraded it. I have 200 gigabytes of data.
The guns, we just didn't say anything at all.
But by then, you see the difference, okay? $70 a month for 100 gigabytes. And that was after they upgraded that plan. Because before that, $70 wasn't for 100 gigabytes. And then this one is only $10, right? What would you choose? Obviously the $10 one, right? That's monthly? Monthly, yes.
Low wooden building with a pickup parked out front. We were filthy.
It's crazy. It's crazy amount of money. And they also have data roaming. So when you go overseas, you also get data.
PS patch took one look at us and said, "I'll get you boys some coffee." And as we sipped from our cups, we
use 100 gigabytes a month. I don't know. But I was just comparing the two plans because now even the older telecom companies, right? Their smallest pack, their smallest deal, the monthly cost postpaid, right? It all starts with 100 gigabytes.
No gear, just the concrete.
Okay, but the price,
scratched up symbols.
The price isn't just $10.
And the police didn't seem surprised. One of them even said the Frank had a history.
Obviously, there's people who complain. There is people who complain about the company that I'm currently using from because they say like the data isn't that stable in Singapore. But I have no issues with it, so I don't care. Okay, it's $10. All right, don't ask for too much.
No arrests.
If you don't like it, then go back to paying the $70 a month or something. You know.
You know what I mean? Stared out the passenger window, staying silent almost the whole way. I gripped the wheel. My knuckles were turning white, just replaying all of that in my head. The forest that had been ours once, a place of sanctuary.
I need that telecom here.
Whoa! On the drive back, it felt like
only $10 a month.
Something hostile and
it's great.
Uninviting.
It's good.
Lewis and I didn't talk about hiking again for a while. Not in the Frank, not anywhere. And I've often wondered who those men were and if they ever returned, rifles in hand, watching for the next pair of idiots to step too close.
Bro can power my whole PC. Not wrong, you know.
A long time ago now,
I once told my mom.
And I went hiking.
Hello, Zolanius. I once told my mom, right, because
since early morning, walking along the trails,
one of the somebody from church was like talking to her about they do like selling of houses and stuff and helping people rent houses and stuff. I forgot what that job is called, so you know what I mean, okay? It's one of those jobs, okay? And then they had a tenant who wanted to ask if the owner would allow them to get a whole new different router for their internet. So they wanted a separate one that they would pay for themselves, but a separate one so that they can have higher speed for internet, right? But the thing is, here in Singapore, in one house, okay, in one house you can only have one router. Okay, that's the thing. You can only have one router. So you cannot have two separate internets in like one house. It is what it is. Okay, so I was like telling my mom, just tell them to go and get that $10 mobile data. You know? $10 mobile data. You can't have a whole ass internet router, but you can have your phone as your internet router, and you get 100 gigabytes of data. Right, so it's enough. Whatever you need to do is 100% enough. That's the thing. It's a thing. It's a thing here in Singapore.
Move so fast and so quiet, it was almost gliding. And then
we have weird things, but I think it's okay.
Stiff and cold, rustling the trees around us and kicking up dust.
There are reasons why they do some things.
It didn't feel like normal wind. It felt like it was chasing whatever had passed over us, like it was part of it somehow. I felt the hairs on my neck stand up.
And I think, you know,
lowered the map and spun around, looking at
it works out for us, so it's all good.
Saw that, right?
In my book. Anyways.
I just nodded because what else was there to say, really?
There are a lot of people here. Recently, there's going to be an election soon. So I keep seeing videos about how people are complaining about the government and stuff. And I have to say, I like my government. I don't really like my opposition party because my house is under the opposition party. And they don't really maintain the house here. So I don't like them.
There was just nothing. The sun was back, bright as
That's about the only reason. Back when I was under the government party, they maintained my house.
And Andre didn't argue. He grabbed the map off the ground and
this one doesn't maintain my house.
Moving. Neither of us said it out loud, but
and we live in a high-rise building.
The same thing. Get out of there now. We didn't even bother sticking to the trail. We just headed straight back the way we came, cutting through bushes and trees and ducking under branches. I kept my eyes on the sky.
They literally had like they had at the letterbox, right? Because the apartment building, you have a letterbox, a communal letterbox where you have your individual letterboxes for your house.
It took us maybe an hour to get back.
They painted like 6 squares there. Because they want you to be like, hey, pick a color for your building. We're going to paint your building. It's been there for like months, man. Paint the building? Nothing's happening yet.
Back and climbed in, and for a while, we just kind of sat there catching our breath, staring out the windshield at the trees. And after a while, Andre broke the silence, asking, it was probably just a bird, like a hawk or something flying low. Shadows can look bigger than that, than they are, right?
I don't know.
He didn't sound convincing, but I could tell that he was trying to talk himself into it. Right, I said, nodding even though I didn't believe it. And the wind was just a coincidence. He agreed as
they don't really care about my part of the house.
Like saying out
my part of the house? My area?
Just freaking ourselves out over nothing.
Because they get most of their votes in another area. So even if they don't really care about us that much, they don't lose anything.
Vulture or an eagle swooping down, catching the light just right. And the breeze could have been random too. It's not like the weather stays still in the woods, but deep down I knew it didn't.
Mom was mad about it before because like they keep increasing the maintenance price for our house area. But they don't do shit.
Smooth and quick.
Mom got really annoyed.
Seen the sky before. We drove back to town mostly quiet, radio filling in the space between us and country songs, and every now and then Andre would just glance at me and I could tell that he was still rattled, and so was I. When we got to my place, he didn't stick around like he usually did after a hike. There was no cracking open a beer or rehashing the day. He just said that he'd see me later and peeled out, like he couldn't wait to put distance between him and what happened. And to be honest, that night I couldn't sleep. All I could think about was that shadow and the breeze and the way the woods just went quiet. I told myself it was stupid, that we just spooked ourselves like a couple of kids, but I really couldn't shake it. And eventually weeks went by and we didn't talk about it again. Life went back to normal, or at least it tried to, with work and bills and the usual grind helping us keep our minds off the shadow. I even went hiking again, though not on that trail, and nothing weird happened. But every time I'm outside now, especially on a clear day, I catch myself looking up. I don't know what I'm expecting to see, but I can't help it. That shadow's still there in the back of my mind, and I still get the feeling that whatever caused it wasn't just some bird. I looked it up online once, late at night when I couldn't stop thinking about it. I typed stuff like big shadow in sky and unexplained things in woods into Google before scrolling through pages of conspiracies and blurry photos. Some people talked about UFOs, others about giant birds or government experiments, but none of it seemed to fit, not entirely anyway. Whatever we saw or whatever we didn't see seemed stranger than that, like it was something that didn't belong. My mind wandered, exploring possibilities, but in the end, I felt silly. I just shut my laptop, feeling dumber for even trying. Andre and I still hang out, but we really don't hike much anymore. It's not like we decided that, we just stopped planning trips, and I think we both know why. Neither of us wants to say it, but the day changed something. We can't really laugh it off, call it a fluke, but there's this sort of quiet thing between us now, a sort of shared secret that we don't touch. Sometimes I wonder if it's still out there, circling the woods, waiting for someone else to come across it. I'll never forget how small it made me feel, standing in that clearing watching the sky for something that never showed itself. I don't know if it's dangerous, or if it's just there, but I know deep in my gut that it isn't normal. I was part of a search and rescue team dispatched to Olympic National Forest in the summer of 1983. The call came in late Tuesday night just as I was finishing a shift at the station. Terry Fishgold, a local hiker who had been walking the trails for years, hadn't returned from one of his solo trips. His wife had waited until Monday evening before she called it in, figuring he'd just stayed out longer than expected. When he still wasn't back by Tuesday, she gave us the details and a description of his gear. His last known location was a trailhead near the Quinault River, and his intended destination was a ridge around 8 miles north. It sounded routine. Terry knew the forest and we had a clear starting point, so I'd have bet my last dollar on us finding him by sundown. But as it happened, that particular search and rescue operation proved anything but routine. Including local law enforcement and a bunch of civilian volunteers, around 30 to 40 of us gathered at the trailhead just before dawn on that Wednesday. We loaded up with the usual, radios, first aid kits, maps, rope, and flashlights, and then split the search area into a grid. My team and I took the western edge of the grid, near the river, while the others fanned out east. The plan was to sweep north, hit the ridge by nightfall, find Fishgold, and bring him home. Then, at exactly 5:47 a.m., we hit the trails. The first few hours dragged on with little to report. We moved slow, scanning for broken branches, scuffed dirt, or anything that might show Terry had passed through. We'd called out his name every so often, but apart from that, the forest was quiet. But then, around noon, the voice of one of my team members buzzed through my radio and broke the silence. He'd found something. I adjusted my course and then hiked a half-mile east to meet the rest of my team. When I got there, they were all looking up. High up in some tree about 30 feet off the ground was a backpack. It was torn open, its straps were flapping, and the contents had spilled out onto the branches and ground below. From its appearance alone, we knew it was Fishgold's, and it was just as his wife had described it, a green Keltie with a red patch stitched on the side. One of my team, a guy named Jim, volunteered to climb up, rigging a rope and harness while we watched from below. And the tree was thin, its branches were too slender to hold much weight, yet the pack was lodged up there, caught like it had been thrown with an impressive amount of force. When Jim brought it down, we saw the damage up close. The fabric was shredded, with long gashes running through it. No bites or scratches from what we could tell, it was more like something sharp had ripped it apart. Inside, Terry's water bottle was cracked and a soggy sandwich sat just half eaten and crushed with the dirt. And there was no blood though, not yet from what we could see. That came afterwards. 2 hours later, one of my team radioed in. She'd found one of Terry's boots in a small clearing. I hiked over and there it was, just like the Danners his wife had mentioned him wearing, brown leather, laces tied, standing upright like he'd stepped right out of it. No blood, no damage, just the boot sitting there alone. We marked the spot and moved on, figuring the other one would turn up close by. It didn't. About an hour later, one of the other teams called from the eastern edge of the search ring, almost 2 miles away, and when I heard what they had to say, my blood turned to ice. They'd found the second boot, but it wasn't empty. Terry's foot was still inside, cut off just above the ankle. The bone break wasn't clean, the skin was torn and a few flies were circling it. And the blood was still sticky too, meaning it hadn't been there very long. The other team said that they snapped a few photos for the report and then they bagged it and moved on, but after that, the forest started to feel heavier to me. We'd seen bad injuries before, falls, shootings, animal attacks, but this didn't fit. A bear might tear into someone, but it wouldn't leave a foot in a boot, severed clean and dropped miles from the other one. We widened the search after that, breaking the grid into tighter sections, and not long after, we noticed the blood. The first time I spotted some, it was on a tree. It was a small smear, no bigger than a coin, staining the bark at eye level. One of my team found another spot 10 feet away, higher up, like it had been flicked there. Then another pointed out more droplets splattered across a cedar's lower branches. We started marking them with flags, and it didn't take long to see the pattern, or rather the lack of one. The blood was everywhere, tiny specks of it spread across the forest in every direction. I'd taken a few steps and find another dot, and then another, like someone had taken a blood-soaked rag over entire sections of the woods. But late afternoon, we'd covered almost half the grid and found nothing. No body, no clothes, just the pack, the boots, and his blood. A few hours later, the sun was starting to set and a fog was rolling in. We stuck closer as a group, not really talking much at all. We just kept moving, marking blood spots and searching for our missing hiker. Night came fast and we set up a base camp near the ridge. The plan was to rest as much as possible and then pick up at dawn, but I couldn't sleep. The forest was too quiet. There really didn't seem to be any wind or animals, just this sort of eerie silence. Then, at around midnight, I heard a branch snapping. It was loud and sharp, maybe 100 yards out. I sat up, grabbed my flashlight, and swept that beam across the trees, but I didn't see anything move. I stayed put and things stayed quiet till I was relieved, but it was the same unnatural quiet, the kind that you'd never hear in the woods at night unless something's making everything else stay quiet. I got a few hours of sleep after a teammate took over the watch, but morning didn't bring me any relief. We packed up and pushed north, following that blood trail, and it kept going, smeared on trunks and dotted on branches, with some spots so high that I had to tilt my head all the way back to see them. I found one mark on a pine tree 10 feet up, with no limbs below it to climb. The blood looked fresh, like it had been put there while we slept, and I remember that sense of creeping apprehension growing as I marked it on the map. One of my team found a cluster of droplets on a rock, arranged in a rough half circle. Another spotted more on a fallen log.
Armadiasa-25 was forced into the coven.
We stopped trying to make sense of it at that point. We just kept going.
Thanks for following, Ahmad Yasso.
By then,
Yasso.
And by
Sorry, I can't pronounce
the
name.
day, we'd reached the outer edge of the search area. But on account of the pieces we'd found, the prospects of finding fish
He got forced, yes.
slimmer by the minute.
Everybody gets forced into joining the coven. We take your blood every month.
We called off the
We don't
search
do
on
anything else with the blood, but we will take your
Terry
blood
was
every month.
obviously dead. No one could lose that much blood and still be walking around. We radioed it in, packed
Welcome
it
in.
up, and left the rest to local law enforcement.
Okay, this
When we hit
look
the
okay
trailhead,
to
I
you?
looked back. The trees were just standing still. The fog was starting to roll in
We're
again,
stuck here now,
and
yes.
officially,
We're never
Terry
leaving.
wasn't anywhere in the grid.
We're stuck with
But my
us.
gut told me that wasn't all the way true. The official report listed this as an animal attack. The bear made sense for the torn pack and the severed foot, but I knew that it wasn't right. No bear could toss a pack 30 feet into a tree, onto branches too weak to hold its weight. No bear could spread blood across miles of forest, painting it on bark
You
and
like
rocks
it?
like
Thanks.
some deliberate mark.
I'm
I've
glad
seen
you do.
bear kills. The
I'm
torn
happy you
flesh,
do.
the scattered bones, the mess of guts left behind. But this
God's
was
left
different.
behind.
The report got filed. Terry Fishgold was declared
Yes, it looks
deceased,
okay to you?
and his
Okay.
body stayed unrecovered. It was one of 3 failed
We'll
missions
save
that we
this.
had in the 1980s. Most of us moved on after that.
And
and
then
took
we'll
desk
separate the
jobs or left
parts.
the field entirely. But I couldn't let it go. The pack and the tree stuck with me, and every so often my mind would wander off, and I'd see the pack hanging there, shredded and out of reach. I'd think about that foot in that boot, too, all raggedly severed like it had been torn off and dropped for us to find. I'd remember all that blood and how the branch snapped, sharp and close, and
you have a generic AF design. That's okay. Just, you know, upgrade the design in the future. Easy, right? Totally easy, right? Just upgrade it. I mean, I had a generic design in the beginning too.
And I knew what he meant.
Okay.
I just didn't agree that he wasn't there. Whatever took Terry wasn't to bear, but it tore him apart piece and marked the forest with what was left. I think he was still there too, or I know he was.
I just changed my design
that second day.
A lot.
Another team member
until now. I don't really change my design anymore now.
She moved inland away from
because designing is a pain in the ass.
And Sarah disappeared too.
I hate designing.
Just kind of gone, not forwarding an address. Our guy Jim stuck around much longer, and he got kind of quiet, and he started to drink more. And I heard that he took a job with the Forest Service. Irony of ironies, really, though he never really talked about that mission. I don't blame him. We all carried it differently, but we carried it all nonetheless. I kept the map from that search. The blood marks are still on it. Little X's in red ink stretching across the grid like a web. I don't look at it often, and when I do, it's not unusual for a shiver to run down my spine.
We will rig it.
But something else was there instead, waiting in the woods we'd never searched.
Wait a second.
I used to be a forestry surveyor back in the 90s, working up in Bun Tut National Park in Yukon, Canada. On paper, the job was simple. Map the land, mark the trees, note the changes. But in practice, out there, it was anything but.
We need to rig.
The park stretched over 4,000 square kilometers, a sprawl of dense forest, jagged ridges, and boggy lowlands that could swallow a man whole. I'd been at it for years, comfortable with the solitude and the long days of nothing but myself in the forest.
Finish it up one by one, you know.
I was deep in the interior, further than I'd ever gone
Since
before.
You're here, it's easier to get approval, so we can finish out faster.
It was a 3-day hike, and
even
the
faster.
Even further. I was completely and utterly alone, and that's how I liked it. The day started normal. I woke up at dawn, broke camp, and headed north through a thick stand of spruce. And I'd been following a drainage line, plotting its curve for the survey when the trees ahead started a little off. They weren't standing right. They were tilted, leaning outward like they'd been pushed by some powerful force. I stopped, adjusted my pack, and squinted through the branches. Beyond them was a clearing, a rough circle punched into the forest. I stepped closer, my boots were sinking in slightly into the earth, and that's when I saw it. Everything within that circle.
I was going to say my thing can be the last one. Now I have the to-do list.
Bleached and ashy white. Not burned, not frosted, just sort of
I follow the to-do list.
The trees kind of stood there like skeletons, their bark peeling in dry, powdery flakes, and as I walked,
delete that. I'm not sure if I'll be able to rig her tail exactly how I want to. We'll find out. If I can't, I'll just merge everything.
But this was different. I moved forward, drawn toward the center despite the growing sense of unease in my gut. There, in the middle of it all,
need an angry toggle.
Small, maybe 3 feet wide and 2 feet deep, little more than a shallow scoop in that white earth. And I stood over it, staring down. There was no meteorite, no rocks, no sign.
Angry toggle.
Just an empty hole.
Sad toggle.
I remember how still the air was. No birds, no winds, no nothing. And how I felt a sharp and sudden chill crawl up my spine. I couldn't place it, but something about that spot made my skin prickle, like I was being watched by very unkind eyes. I shifted my weight and... I can't live TV and stream at the same time. It's okay. I dropped my pack and pulled out my analog camera. My hands were trembling as I fumbled with the lens cap, but I managed to line up some shots.
Because, honestly speaking, right, YouTube Studio is heavy.
Close-ups of the crater itself.
Or if you're talking about how you have no camera,
I took a dozen pictures
to track your model. I can help you set it up so that it can track using mouse and microphone. If it's about CPU usage, then well, too bad. Okay, let me move this first so that I can put my keyboard on the table and work on this model.
I knew there had to be an explanation for it.
It's heavy. It is heavy. It's true. It's heavy. I agree. Which is why I couldn't do like streaming that much in the past as well, because my old PC cannot stand it too. It's okay.
Solid walls around me at that point.
At least you know you'll have a you'll have a model there when you could one day perhaps stream with it.
I figured it was the strain, maybe dehydration, so I stopped and drank
mayhaps one day stream with it. Let me not overwrite the save file. I did that once before, accidentally overwriting the save file.
By the time I hit the last
ranger
station,
rig
like a pig. With the station in sight, I stopped and leaned against a tree to catch my breath, but then just as it felt like my head was clearing, I threw up. I vomited.
It's okay, just be like that one time. The first time that I returned a gift to like Atty, right? I made him a doll model. And he don't even have a webcam.
Door of the station just a few minutes later.
You know.
The ranger on duty, a guy named Pete.
And then he got a webcam because I made him the model.
I must have been a sight. Pale, sweaty, and swaying back and forth, probably a little puke still on my shirt. And he grabbed the radio before I could even say anything.
Of course you do. You watch him.
Pickup. I didn't hear the rest. My legs gave out and I hit the ground.
I was thinking of swapping this.
As my vision started to blur and I felt hands on me and then just.
I was in the era.
I woke up in an ambulance.
Why did I say era? You know what? Era, same thing.
Was thick with sweat.
Okay, my English sucks anyways. It's not like you guys don't know this.
The paramedics were there, and their voices were very professional as they asked
languages, man.
Where I'd been, what I'd eaten, or if anything had bitten me. And I mumbled about the crater and the white trees, but the words came out just kind of jarbled. And I don't know if they gave me anything, but I remember blacking out again, and the next time I opened my eyes, I was in a hospital bed. And the room was sterile. There were white walls and these beeping machines with an IV line tugging at my arm. And I just felt completely hollowed out.
We have eye mask already.
When a nurse realized that I was awake and that I could hear her, she called a doctor into the room. And he was a tired-looking man with these very thin glasses, and I was relieved when he told me that it was good news. He said their best guess was that I'd been hit with some kind of viral infection, something really nasty that most probably came from an insect bite. But after stabilizing me with IV fluids and antivirals, I'd probably be out in a few days. I nodded. My throat was dry, but my mind went straight to that crater. It wasn't a bite.
I believe that
I told him about the impact.
There is another tracking software called Nizima Life. That one's
left. And he said he'd
Japanese. Alright, it's Japanese, but it does use a little less CPU. However, with that said,
and I got discharged a few days later.
Still heavy. I think I tried it before too.
Probably with a
still heavy.
Bill.
Everything's heavy. Alright, nothing's not heavy.
My camera.
Everything's freaking heavy.
Harris took it off my hands after asking me to go over what I'd seen. And after that, I sat in the break room while the tech developed the film. I needed those pictures. They'd show that I wasn't crazy and that something real had actually happened out there. Now, just so you know, some National Park Service facilities used to have photo darkrooms to develop film photographs.
Heavy, yeah. Everything's freaking heavy. You want to be a VTuber? Heavy. Everything's heavy.
About 90 minutes later, and his face was just blank.
Including, like,
my heart sank.
I believe it was Dusty who told me it, but he said that when you use VC Face for VRoid, right? So the 3D model, the free 3D model, when you use it for that one, it uses less CPU. I have to tell you, on my old PC, right, it does use a little less CPU, but it's still heavy. Okay, it's still heavy.
And the tech just shrugged, muttering something about
especially when you're using webcam.
She just told me that I had
okay,
it rough and I should
webcam,
take it easy.
heavy.
And no one accused me outright, but I felt it. These sort of
I'm planning on getting a GPU so I can enjoy life. But isn't GPU expensive recently? I mean, it depends on which one you're getting, I suppose. I'm talking about the new ones. Heavy on everything? Yeah, VTuber just heavy. The least heavy is PNG tuber.
They'd still give me these insincere nods and looks of pity. And without
GPUs are indeed expensive, right?
And my words simply wasn't cutting it.
I'm not gonna buy a new one because it's heavy on your wallet.
Team, so I tried to.
Heavy. Everything's heavy.
Routine dulled the edges, and just keeping busy with these mapping trails, counting trees, and filing reports made it easy to pretend that I'd moved on, but I hadn't, and I really couldn't. Every other trip out, I'd scan those woods, sort of half expecting to see that ashy glow between tree trunks, and I wanted more than anything to find that strange white impact site again so I could mark it on my map. But at the same time, I didn't want to expose myself or anyone else for that matter to whatever made me sick. And that's what made it easier to keep my mouth shut, but I never forgot about it. I started warning the new guys to stay away from anything strange or unfamiliar. And they just kind of grinned, thinking that I was spinning some tale or playing a trick on them, but I meant every word. The forest wasn't just trees and dirt. Sometimes it hides things that'll make you sick, things that just don't belong. Now time rolled on, and after my retirement in 2004, I moved south to a little house near Whitehorse, and the nightmares eventually tapered off, but that memory really stuck around. I'm old now, pushing 70, and I wanted to share this with you all. My hands shake worse than they did back then, and my knees creak when I stand up, but my mind works just fine, and sometimes I get to thinking about what I saw up there back in the 90s. I kept those blurry photos, shoved in some envelope in my desk drawer, and every so often I might pull them out and just stare at those white smears and sort of wonder. And after doing some reading, the meteorite theory just doesn't quite fit. There was no debris, no heat scars, and if I had been exposed to radiation or some kind of chemical, then the doctors would have found it in my system during one of their tests.
If I wasn't really that impulsive to buy something, I could have upgraded already.
In anything celestial
if it weren't really that impulsive, what do you mean?
A total rational explanation.
You spend money on other things?
To me afterwards. I just can't for the life of me figure out what that is. I'd like to know, don't get me wrong, but at the same time, in my old age, I guess it doesn't matter. Because whatever it is, if I ever see it again, I'm walking straight the other way. A few years back, I decided to go for a hike by myself.
Spending if I saw something. Could be food, could be random. Okay, I get that.
I needed to get up
I get that.
I grabbed my keys.
I spend so much on food, okay? This food, not cheap.
It was an hour or so from my house, tucked away in some woods that I'd never explored before. And the drive was quiet.
Food, not cheap.
My engine and the trees blurring past the windows.
Yeah, I put it in the car.
I parked my car in a little gravel lot near the trailhead, locked it up, and started walking. But that's where things get a little fuzzy. The next clear memory that I have is me driving back home, hands on the wheel and the sun dipping low like hours had just slipped by. But everything between?
We have food at home anyways, honestly, right?
There was a black spot in my head.
Sometimes there's no food at home because we finish eating it
I tried to piece everything back together that night.
Don't go out to buy more.
I barely touched.
So, food at home? No, all eaten finish.
The faded wooden sign marking the trail, and I could even
food at home where? Where's the food at home?
And hiking steadily along the trail.
But oh boy, I want to buy outside. I mean,
image that keeps popping up.
Sometimes you just want some outside food, you know.
Everything calm, but that's
I get that.
Everything else is just a blank wall in my mind before I'm back in my car, driving home like nothing happened. It creeped me out very badly, and I kept asking myself what the hell could have happened, but I couldn't think of anything. The next day I called in sick to work. My head was feeling pretty heavy and I couldn't focus, and I kept staring at my hiking boots by the door. They seemed to be caked in
sometimes Sometimes I too. Even though technically speaking, I have food at home. It's instant noodles. Okay. That's food at home, but sometimes I just don't want to eat instant noodles, you know? I want to eat something else.
He checked my eyes and my reflexes, all that kind of stuff. And he said I seemed fine, that there were no signs of a concussion or anything weird. And he told me to come back right away if it happened again and got another one of those memory gaps. I said I would, but driving home from that appointment, I felt this in the pit of my stomach. He said I was fine, but I didn't feel right. That evening, I remember sitting on the couch in front of the TV, but I wasn't really watching. I was just thinking, sort of like waiting for something to click. I thought maybe I just zoned out on that hike, like when you drive somewhere familiar and don't remember the turns. But that wasn't that.
Okay.
This was hours upon hours that I couldn't remember, like they'd been stolen from me. So I got up and grabbed my phone and looked up that trail online. It was called Black Pine Loop, some old path not many people used anymore, and I scrolled through a couple of hiking forums hoping for something useful, but most posts were a whole bunch of nothing. People talked about deer sightings or how the trail needed upkeep, but then I found this one thread, buried deep from a guy who'd hiked a few years before me. He said that he'd felt off the whole time, like something was wrong with the woods, and he said he found a stretch of trail where the trees looked wrong.
I can't imagine ever going into the woods alone.
He didn't mention anything about memory loss or anything like that, but reading about those trees got me thinking, and then by the time I got to overthinking, I shut my phone off and didn't look again. And days eventually turned into weeks, and I tried letting it go, and I didn't tell anyone.
I need to swap a few things.
Or family. I mean, really, what was I going to say? Hey, I went for a walk and forgot the whole damn thing. They'd probably think I was nuts.
Oh, I put the legs in the wrong rotation.
Nothing. Sometimes I'd think it was happening again, and panic would start to hit.
I sure did.
But thankfully, it hasn't. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever happened with that time loss was tied to that trail.
It was tied to the trail.
When I was a kid, my family loved the outdoors. My dad was in the Air Force, stationed at Hill Air Force Base in Utah, so we often went to change the years, especially in the fall when the trees turned bright red and gold.
Okay,
the drive took about an hour, but the dirt road was scary.
This one
it
is
hugged tight against rock walls on one side with a steep drop. Sometimes cars had to creep past each other, inches from the cliff, and I'd look out my window and see tiny trees far below, and I remember kind of just shuddering. One trip stands out back in the 90s.
There's that one, and then I need to do the rest of the stuff.
Usually meant day trips or cabins, but this time we borrowed an old 70s tent from a garage sale. Me, my parents, and my siblings, and our 2 dogs piled into the car. We reached the campsite by a creek in the late afternoon and then set up the tent, laughing as the dogs just chased each other. We built a fire, ate some hot dogs, and then when it got dark, we doused the fire
some hot dogs.
Sleeping bags. I fell asleep to the sound of the creek, but sometime later I woke up. One of our dogs was growling low, his fur bristling.
Why did it?
And at first I thought it was just a rabbit because earlier we'd seen a few hopping around.
Why do you not connect?
Then I heard
What's this? What's this bullshit?
Crunch. The sound of footsteps on the forest outside.
Okay.
My whole body froze.
Let's hope the tail works.
Someone was out there, moving around our camp. I was so scared I could barely breathe. The footsteps got closer and I heard them circle the tent slowly. The dog's growling got louder, but I stayed still, too scared to move, and I could tell the person was poking around, maybe checking our stuff. They even tugged at the car door, but it was locked.
Really getting a lot of comments. Yeah, puppet models, very popular.
Something worse, someone who wanted.
Which, well, you know,
I heard them.
Personally, I do think for $50 is not a bad price. I'm saying that about my own shit. I'm saying this about my own shit, but I think $50 is not a bad amount of money.
I laid there. My heart was pounding until I couldn't hear them anymore.
Good for when you're just beginning, you know, don't want to spend like
He'd been awake the whole time.
Thousands of dollars
didn't say it, but
for a model.
I could tell he was scared. He waited a bit, shook my mom and siblings awake, and then announced that we were leaving.
Okay, let me find.
No one talked much, just stuffed sleeping bags.
Find
the tent by flashlight, and the dog stayed close.
So Bone 1 will be in.
It was around 1 a.m. we
Till
piled into that
0.
car. The canyon road was darker than ever, and as we drove,
Bone 2 will be in rotation 2.
Shadows. My dad mentioned seeing cars full of college kids heading up earlier, and he said maybe it was one of them, but he didn't sound too sure. We got home
Bone
safe,
3 will
but
be in rotation 4.
None of us did. Was it someone who was lost, looking for help? A thief checking campsites?
I was considering buying it before for 50 USD. Save your money, man. Get it with channel points.
I hear the crunching
You know what?
footsteps on the forest floor.
This is good enough for me. It works. The bones are not getting deformed. I didn't want to merge the bones together with the tail because bones are not supposed to, you know, bend. I was hoping this would work, and it works. So it's all good. I'm going to keep it this way. Okay, now we gotta do the rest. Oops.
If you got a story, be sure to submit them over at my email, letsreadsubmissions@gmail.com.
Oh, he's dying. Before it doesn't have channel points? True.
Your story featured on the next
True.
video.
Not wrong.
And if you want to support me even more, grab early.
I decided to add it into channel point redeems because, you know,
or click that big join button.
I just wanted you guys to have something else. Plus the 1 million is gonna take a long ass time. You're not gonna be able to get it that fast.
In the description below.
So I decided to provide something that's a little easier to get, you know, but still a live 2D model, so you can still use it to stream and stuff. I get it. Alright, I get it. Save up points like me waiting for about 20 years to get the 1 million. Exactly. But at least I've been streaming a little bit more recently, but it's still gonna take forever to get 1 million points. Even if you have tier 3, like a certain dog, okay, who has tier 3, it's still going to take forever to save up freaking 1 million points.
My only wish is that you and your subscribers.
I mean, it's free shit, so, you know. But still.
I think there's someone living off the grid up here in the
but still.
Deer Lodge National Forest. And I know for a
hello, Bobo, she's talking about you. It's okay, he knows.
Very dangerous. Part of the reason I moved up to Boise from my native California.
Hit ribbon and go SY.
Is that there's a total of 10 national forests within driving distance of the city.
He should know, because he's the one with
my dad and uncles used
tier
to take
3.
my cousins and me during summer vacations, and I found a group of fellow college students to hike with when I was at UC Irvine. So when it came time to choosing a place to start a new life, Boise climbed my wish list pretty damn quickly once I realized that it combined urban amenities, a low cost of living, and the kind of natural beauty that made Southern California.
Right, this is why I say with hoods up, your puppet model would look even more flat. After all, right, look at that movement, okay? There's literally no 3D movement to this, okay? This is why it's so cheap. Alright, it's cheap for a reason. So, there is someone who commissioned me for a hood up version of their model before. I do it. I just think it's freaking flat looking as hell. If you ask it, I would be like, I'll do it. I don't recommend it.
I mean, you don't truly get to know.
Okay, this is truly so flat looking.
One trip to Beaverhead, and if I ever
not even kidding.
The place, you can bet your ass I'm staying the hell away from the hills between Maverick and Stewart Mountains.
It's free shit. Period. Exactly.
Your life. So should
I think I provide quite a little bit of free shit. You get to get free emotes, right? Well, technically it's one emote, so you get to get free emote unless you redeem multiple. And now you get to get a free puppet model.
Capillary system of narrow trails. It kind of reminded me of one of those old hedge mazes.
It's free.
Like the kind from The Shining, just on a much bigger scale.
Technically,
all the trails
not exactly free, because you have to spend time to watch, or at least spend time to lurk in the channel. You don't have to watch it. Okay, I don't care if you watch it or not. You can just lurk to get the channel points.
It was there.
And then get your redeem. And I'll be totally fine with it too.
Boom. The trail would narrow off and you'd find yourself at a dead end. I guess to a less experienced hiker, that might have been a cause for concern, but for me, it was almost nostalgic. I hadn't been even close to lost for coming up on 15 years by that point, so for me, there was something almost thrilling about it. It's been years.
In all honesty, you don't even have to spend money.
Hike. I also enjoyed them, but I'd long since lost that sense of childlike awe and wonder. So to have it back, that was really something. I kept on exploring for about an hour or so, just wandering up and down the trails to try and familiarize myself with that part of the valley. Then, as I was moseying down this one particular stretch of trail, I began to smell something that smelled a lot like campfire smoke.
That's what I usually do. This time I am looking, those are gonna be more active.
Any fellow hikers and campers I might run into.
It's all good.
Intrusive or even bothersome, but to me, those are big city ideas. I understand where my critics are coming from, but at the risk of sounding melodramatic, the woods aren't the kind of place that you want to go unnoticed. Part of it's just being friendly, shooting the breeze with some kindly strangers, but there's a practical side of it too. I do a lot of solo hiking, and as much as I take all the necessary precautions, I'm still much more vulnerable than most. I like folks knowing I'm there, and I like knowing just a little about who I'm sharing a trail or park with. That way, if I detect even the slightest of bad vibes, I can make myself scarce before trouble so much as toots in the wind.
Bad vibes.
And so,
I never really understood hiking or caving or cave diving.
Lo and behold, the smell of smoke gets more and more intense the further I walk. And so off I went, following the smell like some human bloodhound until eventually the pines thinned out and I reached a kind of treeless shelf on the hillside. It was almost completely hidden.
Not something I would ever consider doing.
This is flat enough to build on. I realized someone already had.
Good enough.
About 50 yards away, someone had built what looked like a small 2-room cabin, complete with the beginnings of a little vegetable garden out front and a short weave fence marking the property's boundary. My first thought upon looking at it was, this can't be legal. Because as much as
hiking is understandable, I hate exercise, so
kind of permanent dwelling is strictly prohibited. But at the same time, this person's dwelling
caving,
was a piece of work, and it obviously wasn't.
I heard so many stories about how people just, they die in caving because there isn't a map or anything, right? So you're kind of blind. You're in there blind, and there's no natural lighting in like caving too, so you're really blind. I hate not being able to see in the dark already.
A pair of blue jeans. Now his cabin had a pair of windows complete with what looked to be hinged shutters, but he hadn't looked out.
Cave diving's even worse.
So the moment he
isn't diving even worse?
I see the startled look come over his face, and he does not look pleased to see me. I figured I'd obviously gave him a bit of a jump scare.
You can see how much the tail is being stretched and squished, but it's fine.
He doesn't return the wave.
It is what it is.
Back into his little cabin.
Alright, it is what it is.
Seconds later, armed.
This is what you get from a puppet model.
Hunting rifle.
Oh yeah.
I just want to make it clear that I did not step into this man's property, and the word property is quite purposely in quotation marks I'm writing here now. Neither was I bearing any kind of weapon or trekking pole with me when he saw me. All the guy saw was a 4-eyed, overweight dork with a floppy hat and a patchy beard, and his first move was to go grab his rifle.
Oh,
the second I saw it, I turned on the spot and started walking back down the hill towards the tree line. And then as I walked, I shouted back, "All right, mister, I get the message. I'm leaving."
Cave diving is worse because you have
hindsight is always 20/20.
You have time or it. You have the time, yeah. This oxygen tank and stuff.
I figured running would be the loudest way to announce my guilt. run off through the trees
crazy.
and think that I was up to no good, maybe fire off a shot at me, and that'd be all she wrote. But if I walked, hands in the air, not going for my own weapon and just trying to de-escalate,
angry, sad,
everything would just be fine.
Then we have the star eyes. The star eyes blinking.
Nothing too
looks the weirdest, but it's fine. Okay.
And whatnot.
It is what it is. Cave diving is basically turning into a roach. Explain yourself.
That constituted a serious escalation.
You can't just say that and call it a day. Explain yourself. What do you mean by becoming a roach?
Or rather,
you go into small crevices and make skittering noises.
I remember giving it a second round of...
Do you make skittering noises?
And in reply, all I heard was, "You stay right where you are."
Yes, stay right where you are.
There's a thing in it, something they call the voice. It's like a magical power. You speak and people will obey whether they want to or not. And I'm telling you, it was like that guy had the voice. He spoke and suddenly my feet were cement blocks.
But no. Cave diving, right? You have that breathing apparatus in your mouth. So how do you make skittering noises? Or are you saying that the apparatus inside your mouth makes you make the skittering noises?
I wanted to shoot this guy and turn a relaxing afternoon's hike into one of the single darkest chapters of my entire life. So he tells me to stop. But I obviously want to face the guy as I'm talking to him, so I start to turn around. Big mistake. The guy raises his rifle, works the bolt to force a round into the chamber, and then points it at me so aggressively that I could practically feel it. He was ready to fire by that point, like my life was in serious danger, but all that was going through my head as I had my arms way up in the air was like, please don't pee your pants. Please don't pee your pants.
You're almost getting shot and you're thinking about don't pee your pants.
What a baby. I cannot overstate how fast your mind works in those sort of situations. I was so scared I felt like I could taste the air.
The skittering happens when you are surfacing or diving? Really?
And I was sweating in places I didn't
Listen, I've never dived before, I have no clue.
So having all those irrational thoughts like that, not running when I had the chance, it all seems like part and parcel of all that raw, primal fear that I was feeling in the moment. Like I said, I started turning to face him, but he racked his rifle and then started yelling things like, "Did I tell you to move? Did I?"
Lost some metal on you in a tight, rocky place. Wait,
all I could think to say was metal? All the same stuff I repeated already.
Oh, I guess there are some parts of it that are metal, huh? Like the breathing tank. And I don't know what other thing. Literally, my brain can only think of a breathing tank.
I told him no. I was just a hiker, and in an attempt to reinforce that I wasn't some kind of fed, I told him I worked for a financial firm back in Boise, which was the truth. I told him the name of the place, my position, and then added that he could call them right then and there if he didn't believe me because the office was open on weekends. I only told him all that because he quite clearly had a problem with cops or rangers and probably just about anyone in a position of authority. That, and once I got talking, I found it unusually difficult to stop. I was still talking when he told me to shut up, and then after a few seconds of what looked like thinking, he asked me a question that had me once again questioning whether I was about to pee my pants or not.
What?
The guy lowered his rifle just a little, which was kind of reassuring, but not by much. And then he asked me, "Do you believe in God?" Make no mistake, I am not prejudiced.
The tank is metal, the harness holding the tank, all the tools you have to get inside the smaller crevices. Can't do usual swimming motions in a tight hole. You're right. I didn't think about that.
In any other context, that question would have provoked anything except an honest answer. But I
didn't even think about cave diving require tools like normal diving.
A hell of a lot of weight.
I just thought you're in water, so you're probably just swimming around.
Something of an agnostic.
I am very smart. Don't worry about it.
Creation and evolution, whatever you want to call it, I just don't think we can so easily put a label like God on it and imagine him up there as this big old friendly white guy with a beard of clouds and sunny demeanor. But then, Having considered my position, I decided honesty almost certainly wasn't the best policy. So instead of the truth, I lied and I told him, "Sure.
Yeah, I prefer this. Okay.
I believe in God." I thought that might have gotten me out of the woods, purely metaphorically, of course, but then he asked me, "Which God?"
Which God?
My gut told me that saying anything apart from Protestant Christian would have probably been bad news for me. And so I went with my instinct and told him that I was Baptist, just like my grandma. When I saw him give me this little nod of approval, I felt so relieved that my knees almost buckled. But unfortunately, the guy wasn't through with me just
I
yet.
didn't mean to do that.
Starting and
I
stopping,
didn't mean to zoom in your face.
began to explain how only two
Sorry about that.
knew that he was up there.
I need to head out now because I'm a bit too tired and I rest. So goodbye. Have a nice day with the election. Thank you. Have a nice rest. Rest well.
Want to shoot me.
Thanks for hanging around.
I guess he intended that to be reassuring, but somehow it was not. And that's the point where things turned back to why he'd asked me if I believed in God. He needed to know that
Hi there. The model said hello there. I didn't mean to do it. I forgot I had... I always forget that I have my move model in the minus button and numpad. So when I do Live 2D and I press the minus button and numpad numbers because it's, you know, rotation. And then it gets triggered every time.
Saying please. But all that did was make him raise the gun all the way up so he could aim down the sights at me. He then repeated himself and told me to get on my knees.
Get on your knees.
I was convinced that I was going to die, and I'm honestly
in general, Syunobi? Why? What?
Or simply because they just gave up altogether. I thought that any second I'd simply go from being wide awake and terrified to just darkness. He'd blow my brains out with a single shot of that rifle and it'd switch me off like a light, you know? I literally remember thinking to myself, at least it'll be quick.
I'm a ninja now.
But then instead of pulling the trigger, he spoke again. The guy told
Why
me
would you change my occupation? God, clearly, I'm a witch.
Never tell another living soul that I'd seen him,
clearly,
or where he was living, or what we talked about.
Oops.
So I did. I put my hands together like I was praying, but I didn't dare close my eyes. Then I swore out loud that never in a million years would I ever tell another of God's creations about anything that had occurred that day. I don't think I said it quite like that, but you get the idea. When I was done, he just said, again, louder.
You're what now? I'm a witch.
I was told. Then once again,
I'm clearly a witch. How could you not tell?
Swear on your family. Tell him to strike you down dead if you breathe a word.
How could you not tell when none of my outfits looks exactly like a witch outfit? And I don't really do witch things on a regular basis. How could you not tell that I'm a witch?
At the time. Instead, I just tried my best to ensure that he kept that
How could you?
control because the moment he lost it, the chances of me getting switched off increased exponentially.
With a W? Oh, you thought I said I'm a bitch? You know, not wrong too. I'm a bitch too.
Of our encounter for as long as I lived. I told him,
I accept that too.
And anything else listening for that matter, that I would happily bury my loved ones if I broke my record in bond.
Syun is just so magical, you know. Yeah, exactly. I'm so magical.
If I ever breathed the word of our encounter. I said just about
he hears something.
Everything that came
it's fine, I'm a bitch too. I say that too.
Really thought about my mom
I say that a lot too.
And how devastated they'd be to hear about my body.
At this point in time, what's new, man? I'm a witch.
That's when I felt myself.
I'm a bitch as well.
I guess that's what really satisfied him in the end. Seeing me get sort of emotional like that. Not just scared, but sad.
And then we have these.
Only then did he lower the rifle. And only then did he let me find my feet, and only then was I allowed to walk back down the hillside towards the trail. He yelled a reminder,
which should just be associated with her
promises.
Wow.
So naturally, the first thing I did once I got some real cell phone signal was to report the
she also associate bitch with me
in excruciating detail to the Beaverhead County Sheriff. Like I said, I'm not religious in the traditional sense, and even if I was, I wouldn't have let that guy manipulate my faith in such a way. This also isn't some made-up story where I'm going to keep the guy's secret or one in which I'm so scared that he'll come after me that I remain silent. I'm willing to admit that I was terrified at the time. I was shaking like a leaf as I walked down that hill, but by the time I got back to my car, I was just about angrier than I'd ever been in my entire life. The mood I was in when I was pacing back and forth calling 911, I could have ended that mother effer 3 times over. But again, that would not have been the right play to make. The grown-up responsible thing to do would be to let the law enforcement handle it, and that's what I tried to do. The only trouble was, after about a week of haranguing the sheriff into dealing with our potential fugitive, I realized that nothing was being done regarding my complaint. First off, piles of red tape meant that the sheriff was forced to inform Beaverhead's contingent of forest rangers of the situation, who in turn took the task off his hands after ensuring him they'd be in touch regarding their search of the area. The day before I called the sheriff for a 3rd time, the rangers had informed him that they'd been unable to
can't really see the ribbon back there, but physics anyways. The physics anyways.
Impossible, since I'd seen the cabin and its occupants with my own 2 eyes. I then went to the effort of providing him with, at least what I believe, are the exact coordinates denoting the cabin's location. 45 degrees, 28 minutes, 30.9 seconds north, and 113 degrees, 12 minutes, 41.1 seconds west. After that, the rangers promised to send out a 2nd search party, and although this one actually found the guy's cabin, the man himself was nowhere to be found, and the man himself been unoccupied for quite some time.
We do the texture atlas.
I have a lot of respect for people that choose to serve this country, no matter what form that service may take. But the ineptitude of the part of the authorities in allowing a dangerous fugitive to slip through their fingers is as staggering as it is frightening to me. I don't know for certain who I encountered.
You try to squish everything.
But I think that 90% of you would agree that the man was most probably some kind of criminal, and that in all likelihood, he was using that cabin and valley as cover to hide from law enforcement. That, or he was just kind of a psychopathic doomsday prepper who took pleasure in terrorizing just some kindly stranger. And either way, the idea of a
he just called himself kindly stranger.
So intense, I'm not sure that I could put it into words. And that's why I haven't been back to Beaverhead since. And then if I did happen to visit
do you like
in
my
the future,
texture atlas placement?
From Maverick Mountain,
only the messiest shit
of that sadistic old
here in this channel.
I guess he figured that I wasn't going
Alright, it's just, if it works, it works.
When the rangers finally did make it out to his cabin, the man who almost shot me was long gone. But that, in turn, takes me all the way back to the beginning of this email, when I said it wasn't so much a campfire story, but rather a grave warning to anyone planning on hiking in southwestern Montana, north of Idaho. I think that guy is just still out there, living off the grid. In fact, I'm certain of it.
Stop stretching
is
it.
That the next person who stumbles across him won't be as fortunate as I was. And rather than just being asked, "Do you believe in God?" I'm scared they'll be sent to meet him. I've been going on long-distance hikes in one form or another for just about as long as I can remember. My dad was an army vet, and his brother was always crazy into bow hunting, so most summers, myself, my father,
good enough, everything's squeezed in.
All head out into
a small texture atlas.
For a few days of
we try to keep it as small as possible.
After he passed, I found that trips into the forest helped me feel closer to him, even if it was just a few hours of hiking on a Sunday afternoon. So at least once or twice a month, I'd gear up and then head out into the wilderness to burn off the stresses of everyday life. I was living down in Augusta when he died, and although there was a nice patch of woods out near Audubon's Bluff, I found the areas between Stevens Creek and the Hamilton Branch State Park to be much more like the woods that I'd hiked through as a child. Also, for accuracy's sake, I'm referring to Stevens Creek up in South Carolina, not the neighborhood in North Augusta, just in case anyone is confused.
Okay. Oh, I forgot I need to unload
miles and miles and not see anyone but the occasional fisherman. And so for about 90% of the time, it was just you, the creek, and the trees, peaceful and serene. But then one time, after driving up from Augusta on a Sunday afternoon, I was about 2 miles into my hike along Stevens Creek when I saw an odd shape in the woods off to my left. As you can imagine, I was used to seeing nothing but trees and the odd squirrel on the side of the creek, so seeing this big, dark lump caught my attention almost right away. I stopped in my tracks, turned to give it a good look over, and saw that someone had constructed a kind of makeshift shelter out of old dead wood by stacking it at an angle against a tree. I actually thought it was pretty cool at first. I mean, it had this slightly creepy, almost witchy vibe to it, but it was still kind of impressive to see that someone had been out there practicing survival skills or whatever. I carried on walking through the woods for another 5 or 10 minutes, then up ahead, I suddenly saw another one of those makeshift shelters. That one was a little bigger than the other, and someone had clearly put a lot more work into binding some of the larger pieces together so the whole thing didn't just collapse. I'd never seen anything like it on any of my previous hikes, and although they looked a little creepy, I wasn't worried about running into the person who constructed them.
The eyes get squished so small.
Sometimes brought their kids along the previous day, and they'd made the 2 shelters as a way of keeping themselves occupied while
that is good enough for my books.
But then, shortly after that thought crossed my mind, I spotted someone up ahead of me, working on one of the same shelters I'd just been looking at. As I got a little closer, I realized the guy looked to be in his 50s or 60s, around the same age as my dad when he passed. He had thinning gray hair pulled back.
I cleared out my models like once already, and there's still so many models. Okay, so we're done with this one.
He stopped what he was doing for a moment, waved, and wished me a good afternoon. We talked for a little while about this.
Next we work on
long
cat.
Story short, he said that his name was Ron, and that he was pretty much doing exactly what it looked like, practicing the construction of impromptu shelters.
Delete progress? No. Not delete the progress.
Camping out there
okay, it's not deleting the progress. It's just deleting what I no longer need on my to-do list. By that, I mean my notepad.
After we shared a few chuckles, I carried on with my hike. My usual routine was, once I'd reached the area near Hamilton Beach, I'd turn back on myself and then retrace my steps along the creek. I thought I might see Ron on the way
60 bajillion to go. No, I don't want that many. I mean, it would be great if I had that many because it means I can earn that much money, but
although I didn't see any
that's insanity talk.
I did see more of his handiwork.
Don't need this.
Every time I went for a hike, there'd be 1 or 2 more shelters, some larger than the others, but always more skillfully constructed. It sometimes felt like me and Ron were engaged in a sort of wordless conversation. Every time I went for a hike, I'd get to see how much he'd improved.
Make sure to delete the things that I do not need.
I always hoped that I'd bump into him again, if only to find out how his survival camping adventure had gone. And that's why, during one particular hike in early September, I didn't feel frightened when I got the feeling that someone else was in the woods with me. I actually felt kind of excited. I recall walking through the woods, just parallel to the creek, and then quite literally hearing the snap of a stick behind me, which made me stop and turn my head.
Slamming cat?
I figured it might be Ron.
Why would you slam cat?
So I turned back and
why would you slam yourself?
Walking off in the direction I'd heard the sound. I walked for about a minute or two when I realized that Ron was nowhere to be seen.
Alright,
in my tracks and started back up again.
Copy that, as always. Put it here.
Something else clearly had, and that something else might not be nearly so friendly. As I said, I backed up to my original path, then carried on walking along the creek via my usual route. I turned my head every so often to take a look behind me just to make sure no mountain lions or bears were following, but other than that, I stayed on my route. I always carried some bear mace and a pistol with me, like I'm not one of those people who very naively believe that bear mace is enough to keep you safe. I mean, aside from the fact that the odor will actually attract all the bears you didn't mace directly, It's not always just the wildlife you gotta be afraid of. And so by the time I'd reached the outskirts of Hamilton Branch, I was convinced that someone or something was stalking me through the woods.
I forgot to
I'm not just saying that out of my misguided sense of paranoia either, nor had I managed to freak myself out by allowing my mind to play tricks on me. When a predatory animal is in your vicinity, everything goes deathly quiet. Birds don't sing, insects don't chirp. It's like every living thing hushes themselves into silence while some hungry killer slips through their midst. Like, you know in the movies when someone says, it's quiet, too quiet. That's exactly where it comes from. When everyone and everything is
exactly where it comes from.
So when I tell you that I knew something was following me that day, please don't think that I'm just some anxious person who can talk themselves into a tizzy. I know something was stalking me, and I know it 100%. I must have been about a half a mile from the Modoc
Now
trail.
we're going to hit slow
and rummage through it for the Taurus 856 that I always carried with me. Being a 38 special and a cool 16 ounces unloaded, it packs just enough punch to theoretically put down a wild animal, while being light enough to not be a literal burden wherever I carried one. It always gave me this residual feeling of safety, but that was the first time I'd ever gotten it out of my pack with the expectation of potentially using it.
You Taurus?
Yet I wasn't
What are you
fearful of
talking about?
actually having to pull the trigger.
I'm so
I was
confused.
fearful of what I might have to aim it at, be it a bear, a mountain lion, or one of my fellow human beings. I loaded it with a speed loader that I kept with me, so
The
within
gun?
just seconds of reaching into my pack, I was locked and loaded and ready to defend myself.
The first thing that went in my mind is the Pokemon.
Watching the woods and the trail, just waiting to see if whatever had been following me was impatient enough to
Taurus
reveal
pistols
itself.
are crap. I don't know about
When minutes
guns.
went by, then I found
Why are
myself
they crap?
peeling off into the trees.
Explain.
Ron? Is that you?
Tell me about it. Oh, that's
I
too
guess
many
that was nothing
points
but
at
wishful
that
thinking on my
tail.
part.
Get rid
Just
of that
kinda
one.
hoping that Ron was, I don't know, maybe playing a trick on me or something. That would be creepy and inappropriate, but it sure as hell beat a wild animal or some other stranger stalking me through the woods. I stood in the same spot a little longer, then I don't know if I did this out
moving
of practicality
tail.
or just to assuage my own nerves,
Up.
but I called out something like, "If there's anyone following me, you better stop now.
Yeah, better stop
Come on.
now.
And I know how to use this thing.
Full
Y'all better stop
arm.
before someone gets shot."
Alright.
But nothing moved.
Arm and
Nothing
arm
stirred.
2.
But I could still feel eyes on me.
They are
At this
made
point, I was
cheaply
faced
and
with
often
something
marketed for
remember.
pocket
I
guns,
could divert
so they
from
are
the lines on the
inherently
ground,
low capacity,
2
low
miles
caliber,
to Modoc,
bad recoil,
and then
etc.
walking a big leap back
So
on myself until I reached my
they're
car,
useless
which
for
was
self-defense
parked down
then,
near Clark's Hill.
if they're that bad.
Or I could save myself at least an hour's extra hike and walk back the way I came while remaining doubly vigilant and alert. Now this was a Sunday, like I said, and back then, Sundays meant that I was on a pretty tight schedule. Not tight enough that I couldn't devote an entire hour for walking along the creek, but tight enough that I couldn't really afford to throw an extra 90 minutes to 2 hours onto my hike. Obviously, when it comes to personal and physical safety, an extra 2 hours is nothing. But I had my mace,
It's
I had my gun,
nothing.
and I had all my experience, the latter of which was telling me that, although there was a bad feeling in the air, I was still safe enough to walk back along the creek side, so long as I kept my wits about me.
They are not useless
And so
against
off I
humans,
went.
but in the forest where bears and
halfway
shit live,
along
now
the
you need actual
It
guns
seemed to be a
there.
fly fisherman
Yeah, I
sitting
don't
up at the
think-
edge of the creek.
I
I
don't
said hi as I
think
walked
pistols would
past,
do that much
stopped and
damage
politely
to
asked
a
if they'd seen anyone
bear.
else walking the trail as they'd hiked out to their spot.
Right, because pistols
They told me yes.
pistols aren't
They
that
had seen someone, but
that
they were walking the opposite way,
strong, right?
meaning that someone had 100% been behind
It
me on
will
the trail.
scare them. Well, I
Turning
guess
back
if
to the
all
point
you're
before
doing
I'd
is
seen
trying
them.
to scare them, it
I
works.
asked what this person looked like, thinking that they might
But if you
call
need
me
to kill-
Ron, but they didn't. And the person they ended up describing
needed
didn't
to
seem like
kill-
Ron at all. They also mentioned how after wishing the hiker a good afternoon,
Bear skulls
the
can
fisherman didn't
ricochet
receive
pistol
any kind of
calibers
reply.
and sometimes even 5.
Apparently,
What's
this hiker
5.56?
returned nothing but an awkward mumble and then carried on.
What's a
their business.
5.56? Is that like
The
a
two fishermen
rifle?
then started asking why I'd seemed so concerned, and so I straight up told them that I was worried about someone following me. Not like an accident.
We're safe from bears. I don't think there's bears in Singapore. There's crocodiles.
It was like someone was there and just didn't want to be seen.
There's crocodiles because of that one flood that
telling me that the man
meditation time.
Camouflage.
Flood and stuff. I forgot exactly why there's crocodiles, but there's crocodiles.
Kind of safety orange.
Papa says it's the standard NATO caliber. I don't know what that is.
People are entitled to walk through the woods wearing
I don't know what that is.
Shoes, but in the context of me thinking that I've been followed, they obviously found the detail as chilling as I did.
Alright.
As a precaution, I told the two fishermen where I was headed and where my car was parked, and then wished them a very pleasant afternoon and headed off. But on the drive back to Augusta, I couldn't help but wonder if they'd really been as innocent.
You know what? I like Skinwalker stories. Skinwalker stories seems creepy. Skinwalker seems creepy.
The idea that it was one of the fishermen that had been stalking me, only to back off when I started acting tough, that was somehow even creepier than anything else. Someone playing nice only to have sinister intentions, like someone out of a horror movie or whatever, it was enough to make my skin crawl, and I decided there and then that I'd give Stevens Creek a very wide berth for a while, at least for a month or two, so I could go back to see what progress Ron had made. Only that never happened, and I don't plan on ever going back to Stevens Creek. And the story of how that
NATO carbine caliber, that is, which is used in your standard infantry rifles like the M4 and CZ brand, etc. Rifles. It's the size of the bullet.
Assuming it was a sales call, I almost hit the red button to decline it.
I've never known
about
these sort of things.
Something in my head just said, answer it.
Not gonna lie.
I did. I heard it was a deputy.
Okay.
From McCormick County Sheriff's Department.
You will make the crowd move a little bit.
My first thought was that I'd committed some kind of
it's supposed to be floating
or something around Clark's Hill, which was usually where I parked my car whenever I went hiking around Stevens Creek. But the call was not about any kind of traffic violation. The call was about my friend Ron. The deputy didn't refer to Ron as Ron, not at first anyway. He simply asked if I'd ever encountered an individual building survival shelters up near Stevens Creek. This deputy had already spoken to the fishermen that I'd bumped into on the day that I'd been stalked, which was how they'd traced me to Clark's Hill via a security camera which watched the parking lot that I'd used. The fishermen must have mentioned that I was a regular hiker there, which ended up making me a potential witness for something I was yet to be informed of. My first thoughts were that Ron
a little bit of that,
maybe gone missing, so I was forthright about my interaction with him. But then the deputy made some allusion to human remains being found out near the creek, and I felt my heart slowly sinking into my chest. I remember this feeling of absolute horror, thinking the same thing that had stalked me had gotten Ron instead. He must have been working away on one of his shelters, completely oblivious to the woods around them, and then, bam, the most painful death you can imagine, without a soul around to ever hear him die. I remember asking if it was an animal attack, if they found Ron, if he had any family. But there wasn't much the deputy was willing to tell me. A
tiny bit of that.
To be honest, I'm still...
Okay, and then we're going to add yet another rotation.
That being said, this is what I do know.
So that everything will follow it.
Human remains found out there. There were two, and neither of them belonged to anyone called Ron. Then, seeing as the two bodies were found in one of the shelters out there by Stevens Creek, the person calling themselves Ron was in fact the case's #1 suspect.
You have it floating
on the insistence of the deputy, this prompted me to search
up
my
and
memory
down
for any instance of Ron mentioning places or people or things, just about anything they could use to pin down his whereabouts. I had nothing. Our exchange had been brief and unexciting, so with regret I informed the deputy that I could no longer assist them. And that was literally the last thing
No, the rotation doesn't make it look good. I should add the rotation somewhere else.
Every so often, in the years that have passed, I've searched the web in the hopes of finding something, anything to help enlighten me on what exactly happened out there. But every time I've tried to practice the not-so-ancient art of Google Foo, as I've heard it referred to, I've come up short. I think
Google
I'm just
Foo.
fishing for details, pieces of information.
Did he say Google?
But deep down, I think I understand what happened to me that day up by Stevens Creek. I think I narrowly avoided falling victim to someone terrible. Not a bear or a mountain lion, a man. And I think someone was walking the woods that day when I got that creepy feeling. Someone who ended up making victims out of two innocent people. And I think only by the grace of
Cat's
God
next model, he is super saiyaning. How? What do you mean by that? It's similar to the Soviet, which is what is used in AK-74s and its derivatives. Oh. I at least know what the AK-74s because of
was living in America
Left 4 Dead 2.
with his wife and 3 young children. Having just moved into a brand new family,
it's only because of Left 4 Dead 2.
Was the happiest point in their marriage. But beneath the surface, something terrible festered and unfurled. Devin was described by friends as a patient.
At least, you know, yeah, only from Left 4 Dead 2.
Exciting new chapter in his life. He disappeared without a trace. On Sunday, May 28th of 1995, a 48-foot, 10-ton, 18-wheeler semi-truck hurtled through Arizona's Tonto National Forest. The roar of its engine was so loud that 2 campers, named Lynn and Jack Yarrington, temporarily halted their hike to see what all the commotion was.
I just know it's from some shooting game.
Seconds later, spotted a speeding 18-wheeler.
I only know a little bit of guns and stuff from some games. Like now I know about SN 700 because of one human, because it's a sniper rifle. And that's why I know it, because I made it, because I like sniper rifles.
Later stated that the truck's mustachioed driver had remained disturbingly expressionless despite narrowly avoiding his own complete annihilation. Later on that day, a group on their way to a picnic spotted the stationary truck, which by that point had swerved off the road and become stuck in a field. After stopping their vehicle, one of the picnic group climbed out of their car and asked the truck driver if he needed any help. The driver's reply was as chilling as it was confusing. "They made me do it," he said, as if answering a question that hadn't been asked. The Good Samaritan, a man named Charles Hall, reportedly asked the truck driver, "Who made you do what?" To which the driver replied in a panicked voice, "No, you can't help.
I like it.
No one can.
The
I'll
crown.
never get it out of there.
I like that there's a little movement in the crown."
When Charles heard the word jail being thrown around, he realized that he might have stumbled across something deeply sinister. He agreed to leave the truck driver alone, but later contacted
casually,
the
I like it.
department, speaking
I like my own shit.
regarding the man's suspicious demeanor. Much like the campers, the deputy was confused as to why such a large vehicle would drive along unsuitable forest roads and went to investigate.
Okay.
Upon his arrival,
And
he discovered
then
the semi stuck in deep mud within a meadow not far from Forest Service Road 137 in the Buck Springs area. Once Deputy Wells looked inside the truck, he discovered the cargo within undisturbed and intact. 1,200 boxes of lettuce and strawberries with the refrigeration still running.
Wow, I didn't. Did I save a PNG?
Abandoned and the cab had been firmly locked.
I did not.
Deputy Wells checked his national crime computer and learned that there were no reports submitted for either
So we're going to
he also
save
stated upon peering through the window of the
PNGs.
truck's cab, he noted the interior was well kept and there was no indication that any foul play had taken place. Later that day, Lynn and Jack Yarrington were driving along Forest Service Road 321 when they came upon a man standing among
Though
some trees
L4D
at the
representation is a bit off, it's supposedly an AK-47, but the model is of an AKM. Magazine size is 40, but there is no magazine with that many cartridges. Closest is 55 round RPK magazine. Fire rate is lower than IRL. 460 RPM versus 600 IRL RPM. I mean,
moments later,
in the end, it's a game, you know. And it's not what do you call it? It's not a game of war or anything. So I don't think they focused that much on the guns.
Only to have the stranger scream
it's an old game also. That's so true. But Left 4 Dead is so fun.
Into the Arrington's direction, prompting them to
it's so old, but it's fun.
Only later was the strange man confirmed to have been the truck driver, Devin Williams, and sadly, it marked the last time he was ever seen alive. When he failed to stick to his delivery schedule and confident in the belief that he'd never willingly abandon a shipment, Devin's coworkers reported him missing. Investigators began to track Devin's movements leading up to his disappearance and learned he'd left his home on May 23rd.
The gun is older, and also it takes 5 minutes to fix those mistakes. But here's the thing, right? If like, why fix it when like nobody like cares that much about it, you know? I don't think people care about the gun that much in Left 4 Dead.
He was punctual, seemed lucid, and gave no indications that anything was wrong.
You know what I mean?
A few nights later, on the evening of Saturday, May 27th,
I don't think they really cared.
In Arizona.
Sadly, which is usually how these kind of things work. You want, if a game company wants to fix like their game and stuff, they might, if there's enough riots about it.
Asked if he'd be able to complete his journey.
If there isn't, I don't think they care.
He'd be fine.
Gun nuts.
Police reports.
Are you a gun nut?
Even made it out of Arizona.
Are you a gun maniac?
Detective Bruce Cornish would later state that he and his team were completely flummoxed when it came to Devin's potential fate. He was neither a criminal nor a drug user, and had no history of mental health.
It's okay. We won't judge you for it.
Meaning easy explanations were hard to come by.
I don't think.
This led many to theorize that Devin's
it's good to have
with some
things you like, honestly speaking.
Items had been removed from the truck. Nevertheless,
it's like, you know, I like art, which is why I always do art.
Trucker, utilizing foot patrols, search dogs, off-road vehicles, and dozens of civilian volunteers.
Oh, did I not copy it in?
Search teams were
I'm really smart.
Scraps of
I'm so smart.
Fragments, but despite days of searching, not a single trace of Devin Williams was ever found.
There we go.
This also made for a chilling anomaly, as up until that point, the Scottsdale-based search and rescue team charged with recovering his remains had yet to come up short in the course of a long-term search.
Cat model.
Devin's disappearance marked the first time that they'd failed to bring home a missing person, either dead or alive.
And then we will... Oops, wrong button.
2 years later, on May 2nd of 1997, two hikers were tracing the bottom of
First of all,
Mogollon Rim
icon
upon the remains of a human skull. Dental records will later confirm what many had first feared. The skull belonged to the missing trucker, Devin Williams. Although the skull had been damaged, a coroner determined it was impossible to conclude if this was the result of a deliberate, violent act or the result of scavengers consuming a corpse following an otherwise accidental death. Some suggested the erratic behavior Devin displayed was the result of a diabetic episode. Others argue sleep deprivation or mental illness were to blame. Some even purport that Devin was the victim of a slow form of carbon monoxide poisoning following a leak in his truck's cabin, but to date, no such theory has been irrefutably confirmed. Devin's wife, Mary Lou Williams, still longs for a day when explanations of her husband's
airsoft is make-believe.
But she also stated that with each passing year, the hope of seeing such a day slowly and painfully decreases. Mary Lou has said that back when her husband was listed as a missing person, the lack of conclusive answers caused her children terrible suffering.
Now we need to start sketching new things.
A sliver of morbid closure to the family, as many questions still remained. For example,
I can't send Lilith the file yet because I need them to check the expression toggles, and then after they pay, then I can send it to them. But I can send Cat the file first. Alright, here we go, Cat.
2 to 3 hours. then something frightened him so badly that he did things that most would consider to be highly and unhealthily irrational. Some say fear can drive a man to madness, in which case, what was Devon
people shoot each other with air guns that shoot paper pellets, sometimes plastic pellets.
A few years later, less than a
so,
mile away from the spot where he disappeared.
Like nerves, I said, it's not the Nerf gun, it's an air gun instead.
Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday and Thursday at 7 p.m. EST, and there are super fun live streams every Sunday and Wednesday nights. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit,
r/Militarized Nerf Warriors.
And maybe even hear your story featured on the next video.
That's easy for me to understand.
To support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon.
Okay. Now we're back to drawing. Back to our thing.
These days, there's a lot of panic
save this
at public pools and gyms. Who can or who can't, who should or shouldn't be in them. Now, don't worry, I'm not here to get all political. I'm not going to offer a take on that. I'm just bringing it up so you can understand why I always kind of laugh when it gets mentioned, because
outfit like in the PNG and hair like in the art and ref of
regulations, expectations, and social norms went straight out the window. And I thought that it was pretty freaking scary at the time, so I wanted to share it. I've been going to the pool religiously 3 times a week as part of a post-pandemic Get Fit Again campaign, and it's actually working. I was really proud of myself. I was sticking to my fitness regime, diet was going well, blah blah blah. And I should probably add now that I'm a female, so this took place in the female changing room at the pool/gym complex I'm still a member of to this day. Me and some of my other friends were in the changing rooms getting ready for a swim session. We'd started getting to know each other from seeing each other at the gym, so we'd begun timing our swim and workout sessions to spot and pace one another. There were 4 of us there that day, plus an elderly woman that I hadn't seen before. You know that kind of sound that lets you know that something bad is coming,
the hair.
but you can't quite describe it. Well, we all heard that, just the sounds of a scuffle coming from somewhere outside the dressing rooms. Loud bangs, indecipherable shouts, just general chaos. I guess we all looked at each other, frozen mid-change. My eyes shot to the hallway that led around the corner from the dressing room, and I think everyone else looked that way too. A man came thundering into the changing rooms, and I'll never forget the sight of him.
Okay, let's see how I'll make this in my style.
Comically short. He wore a white
One problem though, airsoft guns have very low muzzle velocity, so they have low effective range. So the only thing they can semi-realistically simulate is CQC situations like in buildings and such. That's why I laugh at the war gamers that bring their airsoft games outside and have to calculate with ludicrous bullet drops to hit a guy mere 100 meters away. I've never really heard much about airsoft.
And his eyes were absolutely crazed as he burst
I know about people who play the paint guns.
Of his mouth.
I heard it's quite painful when you get hurt with the paint bullets.
The really scary part was that he was holding a massive, wicked-looking machete that appeared rusted and probably infected with tetanus. It didn't even look that sharp. It was absolutely freaking terrible when you're in the middle of changing in your bathing suit for a swim. He paused for a second when he saw us and let out a sort of horrifying grunt scream.
Yeah, his hair?
Animal roar, like a beast. The machete seemed to quiver in his sweaty palms.
It's longer
began running
on the other side.
Me.
So, which side
that I was super brave
is it actually longer at? Who knows?
No. I screamed at the top of my lungs and fell
Who
back
knows?
against
I guess I'll follow this one.
He came charging through and was followed almost immediately by a gang of armed
Paintball is indeed quite painful. Yeah, that's what I heard.
I barely had
getting hit with viscous paint at high velocities is quite inconvenient. Just quite inconvenient.
Instead, he thundered through the dressing room, into the showers, and out into the pool.
Yeah, the parting is near middle.
Cops chased after him. As he ran, he shoved the elderly woman towards the cops, sending her face first into one of them, who caught her, steadied her, and then sprinted off to rejoin the pursuit.
And then he has long
we all stood
hair.
There, terrified and completely shell-shocked. Screams suddenly erupted from the pool area where people had already been swimming, and then more yelling, and then a gunshot. We just stared at each other, sort of like, what the flip just happened?
Move
Did
this
that really
here first.
just occur? The elderly woman was crying and shaking.
It's not gonna break ribs, but it's gonna bruise you up. That's what I heard.
We didn't have to
painful, so much so that you bruise. But people still play them anyways, and I'm like, are you guys
even though the noise from the
masochists?
pool area died down, it was still pretty tense.
Do you like
Thankfully,
pain?
a cop came to get us shortly after and informed us it was safe to come out. None of us really felt like swimming anymore, so we'd already dressed again and exited the gym instead of heading to the pool. As we followed the cop to the front desk, I saw a machete man, now without his machete I assume, being roughly escorted into a cop car. Turns out, he'd been strolling down the street in broad daylight, threatening people with that machete. The cops had been called and he ran, right into the gym, and then into our locker room. It was never clear if he actually intended to use the machete on anyone, and I'm immensely grateful no one was hurt, not even the elderly lady that he shoved. She never came back to that gym, though. I really can't blame her, to be honest. And thankfully, no one was injured when the cop's gun went off during the pursuit. As a responsible gun owner in an open carry state, I've been extra paranoid since then about triple-checking that my safety is on. Then again, I won't go anywhere without the damn thing now because you never know who's gonna come.
Better than airsoft since you can't fake being hit, so you're probably gonna make audible hit noises.
It was probably on bath salts or something, which honestly checks out. Thankfully, the whole thing
fake
didn't leave any
getting
lasting
hit?
scars. It's become the stuff of legends at my gym.
Why would you fake getting
Those of us
hit?
who were there that day still get first dibs on workout gear and are treated like celebrities. The perks of being attacked with a machete, I guess. I'm pretty sure the guy went to jail, but I don't think he's there anymore. The reason I'm writing this is because I think he's out, and I'll never forget the face of the madman who burst into the locker room, not as long as I live. So unless he has a twin brother, he's been released because the other day, even though he looked much healthier and cleaner, I saw an identical-looking man mopping the floor at Wendy's.
In airsoft, people sometimes don't call in being hit because they want to play more. Oh, okay. They just want to play more.
I'm older than your average listener. I'm 61 and this happened when I was 12 and Clarky was 11. I'm also English, as in from England, so I'm sorry in advance for anything that entails. I'm weirdly nervous about writing this up, and I guess you don't need to know this, but I'll stress that this event has haunted me my whole life, and if I think about this too long, I actually start feeling sick, and I think it'll be pretty understandable why. I met Clarky when I was in primary school. We met in the infants, our first year at a small suburban primary school, and became fast friends on day one. From that day on, after I first found him playing with action figures on the playmat in the corner, we were inseparable. He was my best friend and I was his.
With paintball, you can see that you got hit.
We were just normal, regular kids.
The pellets don't hurt that much, especially if you wear thick clothes. Paintballs hit hard enough that it makes faking much harder, plus it is a bright mark to see too.
At least out of the boys. Always up to something, always getting into some kind of trouble or other. Nothing serious though, and adults tended to love us quite a lot, just as much as the other kids wanted to be our friends. I was always more of the leader, and Clarky was more of a follower, but the relationship felt equal. We were partners in crime, and when it came time for us to move on to big school in the town, neither of us really had any reservations. Christ on a cracker, what naive little lads we were, though. If you don't know, the school system works a bit differently in the UK. We don't have middle school, just primary straight into secondary. This means that when you're 11, you suddenly shift to a much bigger, much more crowded school with other students as old as 16 or 18, depending on the school. All of a sudden, we'd gone from being kings of our little primary school to being tiny little squirts surrounded by hulking, terrifying monsters. We were not prepared, man. Just absolutely, completely out of our depth. We strolled up that driveway like kings, and with the passage of just one single day, came crawling back out no more than broken, quivering wrecks. It's a huge crash down to earth to make the shift from primary to secondary, and to this day, I insist it's actively damaging for kids to have such a sudden, extreme transition.
What's he talking about?
Clarky and I had simply assumed that all the kids from our primary school would be put in the same classes together.
This guy, aura-looking guy, wanted a chibi, right?
They students around to try and encourage them to make new friends, which just feels kind of cruel to me.
The handsomeness is all gone.
We were not only in separate houses, similar to
none of the handsomeness in this guy's character would be left.
So only students from 3 houses had classes together. Clarky was in blue and I was in red, which meant that we didn't even have a single class together. Thankfully, we still got to see each other at break and lunch, but damn, it was rough. And on top of that, we suddenly became deeply, painfully unpopular. I could speculate a million reasons why, but ultimately it doesn't matter. Both of us were severely struggling to make friends. And
only cuteness left, even though
most of our days
he doesn't look cute to begin with.
Sure,
only the day after the doll.
And on the weekends, but it just wasn't the same.
It's probably a fake story made by Americans that wanted to portray them British. I don't think it's that.
And as such, Clarky and I became the targets of bullies.
Listen, okay,
my half of the year bullied me.
It's the same thing with like Singapore schools. You go straight from primary to secondary and there's no like middle school or anything. But it's not
they weren't just some year 7s
that
who made our year 7 miserable.
Huge of a change.
And that's what Clarky and I called the group of year 9 boys, but only behind their backs when we were in the safety of my house or Clarky's. In school, we didn't call them anything. We didn't even make eye contact. Jake was a big, lumbering oaf who looked like he'd be a dumbass, but was weirdly creative in his scathing insults. Jonah was completely unremarkable in every way, except he had this cruel twinkle in his eye. Jonah had a tongue that could dish out insults which hurt as much as any punch, and they would do both. They would insult and punch us. Those two, and a rotating group of other faceless friends.
No, he's getting booted.
The sidekicks would change, but Jake and Jonah remained a constant threat. Always there, always needling, always kicking the backs of our shoes or pouring glue in an unattended school bag. Or
if you grow up in a school system, you see that as the norm. You wouldn't say crap like kids shouldn't have to make such a drastic step up. Yeah, that is an opinion formed from the basis of the battle system.
Every fist, every jab, everything that really truly hurt, it all seemed to come from these two.
I don't think it's that dramatic of a change from primary school to secondary school.
Form of punishment. I'm not sure they ever explained what we'd done to offend them so much. It was just an established, known thing that our existence disgusted them, and we would suffer for it. You know what bullies can be like, I guess. You've read enough stories about this vile, cowardly lot. But let me tell you, they were way worse in the past. And we hated school. Our first term there, from September through Christmas, was hell. Then the spring term was no better. Worse, in fact. How our parents
it's not, but for American it is, because it's not like their system. I forgot what I learned in primary. You know what? Me too. Who remembers that shit?
Withdrawn and ask us what was wrong. Why did I never consider just telling them something was up in the first place? You just didn't tell people back then. Dobbing someone in would lead to a fate worse than death. Even people who still liked you would hate you if you dobbed someone in, even a bully, or so I thought. Absolutely stupid looking back. Anybody who'd behave like that wouldn't be worth caring about in the first place, but I guess it's easy to think with adult logic when you're an adult. Then the summer term came and we're introduced to something that we'd never even considered, the school pool. We knew we had a school pool, of course. It was a big building just separate from the main school, but it always seemed like something the other kids got to do, not us.
I prefer camping stories.
In summer term of year 7, I just prefer camping stories.
Your pool story, not interested. Camping, hiking stories. I know the math got harder. Yeah. It sure did. I remember that too. Forever remember.
Way back in the early 30s, my grandpa used to hunt gators in the Louisiana bayou. Grandpa and my 4 great aunts and uncles grew up hand-to-mouth in a little town called Rosedale, near the Atchafalaya River and the bayous it flowed into. Times were tough even before the Great Depression, but after Wall Street crashed, money became even harder to come by. You could try your hand at shrimping or fishing, but since most folks couldn't afford luxuries anymore, the seafood market took a huge hit. Store-cupboard staples like canned fish or oysters still moved, but the canneries only needed so many workers. And the same could be said for the logging crews, too. Construction jobs dropped off almost entirely once the Depression hit, and so did the demand for wood, which left good, honest folks like my grandpa with fewer and fewer options. There was good money to be made selling moonshine, but with Prohibition in effect till '33, it was still a risky business around the time Grandpa needed work. If the revenue men didn't get you, your rival moonshiners surely would, because there was no sure thing as a friendly competition when it came to selling moonshine. However, if you were desperate or crazy enough, there was another method of making money back then, one that would make you an awful lot too while putting food on the table at the very same time. Alligator hunting. The bayou outside of Rosedale is a tangle of cypress trees and tupelo gums, with narrow waterways running between small strips of land that folks call hammocks or house islands. There are much more open stretches of water here and there, but the gators thrive in those mosquito-infested mazes that are sometimes so dense that barely any sunlight reaches the mud and murky waters below it. And there, and if they get enough food, gators can grow from 3-foot juveniles to 12-foot monsters in just over 5 to 6 years. Then the bigger and more powerful they get, the more dangerous and deadly they become. Gator trappers had to know the terrain inside and out if they wanted to safely navigate in and out of the swamps, and a lot of folks made money that way, guiding hunters or trappers into the deepest parts of the bayou where all the oldest and biggest gators lived. You had to know where they nested, where they basked, and where they'd relocate to whenever the rains or tides came in. But if you got it right, you can make a hell of a lot of money in those days. An experienced party of hunters and trappers working dawn till dusk might bring back 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 gators. Then, with good quality gator hides selling for $3 or $4 apiece, a party of 5 could each expect to take home money and food to last their families a week, and all from just a single day's work. It wasn't just the hides that were in demand either. If you salted the gator meat, you could make it last even longer, or sell it while keeping the fresh stuff for yourself. Grandpa also said that there was a mambo, a voodoo priestess out near Mayette Point, who'd pay good money for the gator's teeth and claws for use in her black magic rituals. Given how lucrative it was, it's easy to see why gator hunting attracted so many amateurs, especially once the economy really went into freefall. But it was also very dangerous work, obviously.
Black magic.
In the first year or so after the crash, dozens of enterprising but inexperienced young men waded off into the deepest, darkest depths of the bayou, hoping to secure a living, but finding nothing but death. Arguably, the safest way to bag yourself a gator back then was to trap one. A trapper would bait a heavy hook of iron or steel with a hunk of meat, the more rancid the better, and then simply hang it over a tree branch with a rope like they were fishing. Grandpa said that it could be a horribly effective method, but only when it worked. The gators were just as likely to lunge out of the water than tear the meat from the hook without getting impaled, and like the steel-holed leg traps that some trappers used, not everyone could afford them. Instead, most of the greener boys simply waded out into the swamps with a rifle or a shotgun and hoped for the best, but few ever returned. The same could be said for the whole crews of boys who paddled out in their pirogues in the middle of the night. They used to bring oil lanterns along with them, and when they raised them up high, they'd be able to see the telltale glow of an alligator's eyes. It must have made for an easy method of finding them, but with all that splashing around and with all that blood in the water, it was often the case that the hunter, became the hunted. Stray into the wrong waters and an angry gator could snap a boat in half, or drag a man under the water and drown him before his friends even realized what was happening. Just getting bitten out there could prove fatal too, like in the case of one hunter who ended up being the lone survivor of his party. Gators tore up his boat and ate his friends, and although he managed to escape, the trapper had to wade through stinking swamp water all night long in order to make it back to his hometown. Now, folks over there were heartbroken that they'd lost loved ones, but took solace in the lone survivor having made it home. But he didn't last a week. All that nasty swamp water had soaked into the bite wound to his leg, and he quickly came down with some kind of infection. His family called in a doctor all the way from Baton Rouge, but in the days before antibiotics, there was nothing he could do. And that blight took him down in just a couple of days, and when he was buried, they lowered 3 empty coffins into the dirt right next to him, one for each of his missing friends. Now, news of any deaths out in the swamps always swept through the parish like wildfire, but not one of them stopped people heading out there to hunt gators. And it got so bad that people started making money returning the personal effects of the missing, should they happen across washed-up pirogues or abandoned camps. It was about then that the parish sheriff decided to call time on the whole situation, so he and his boys started cracking down on anyone hunting or trapping without a license. But since licenses cost $5 and could take weeks to obtain, the crackdown didn't stem the steady trickle of the desperate and the doomed. My grandpa was lucky enough to have a license, as did a handful of other Rosedale residents, and although there was sometimes fierce competition between parties, their rivals were, for the most part, friendly. They'd all meet up to drink, smoke, and swap stories at a place they called the Blind Tiger. And that wasn't even the name of the joint either. A lot of illegal drinking spots were named Blind Tigers back then, and all because of some joke about paying a man to see a blind tiger when, really, you were spending your money on booze. Anyway, a lot of the Rosedale trappers and hunters would meet up at this one Blind Tiger on the woods off of Hunter's Run, and they needed no incentive to get drunk and barbecue gator meat, but the real benefits of hanging around that place were the tricks and tips and lessons that you learned from other hunters. Grandpa and his hunting buddies, Charlie and Whit, used to stop by the Blind Tiger every evening, sometimes just to get the scoop on where the good hunting was that week. He said he used to hear some fine and fanciful rumors around that bar. But then,
black magic, such as coding in regex, I don't know how to pronounce that.
John Guidry, this gator hunter who headed up a group of 4, and he was busy telling everyone in attendance about a recent trip into the deepest recesses of the Bayou Shin. They were out looking for the biggest gators they could find when, suddenly, they saw this huge
we have something like
gator
this
on a narrow house island. Their pirogues were all full up with kills for that morning, so they'd have no room for any additional quarry. But even if they had, it would have taken a heck of a lot of wrangling to get that monster into a boat. Guidry said that from teeth to tail, that albino gator had to be at least 20 feet long, meaning the beast had to be carrying around 2,000 pounds of meat and hide on its carcass. But almost as soon as he and his boys laid eyes on it, it slipped into the water and disappeared. All 3 of Guidry's hunting buddies attested to his claim, and while Grandpa might have gotten away with just calling Little John a liar, accusing his whole party would have been downright foolish. But even so, Guidry and his boys could see the disbelief on the faces of those who listened. The doubt of their fellow hunters didn't seem to bother them, though, because Guidry and his boys claimed their doubters would be laughing on the other sides of their faces once they'd hauled that albino beast back home. And because a hide that size, and in such a rare color, they'd be able to afford a whole week of easy living for the sale of it. And so off they went, night after night looking for Old Red Eyes, as they'd taken to calling it at that point. Then one morning, Little John Guidry's wife woke up to find her husband hadn't returned home. It wasn't entirely unusual for hunters to camp out overnight with their kills, especially if the tides changed or the rains came. But when the sun started to set and Little John's party still hadn't emerged from the swamps, people started to worry. Grandpa said Little John's wife barged into the bar that night and demanded to know why the other hunters and trappers weren't out there looking for her husband. The sheriff and his deputies were out there searching for him, but they didn't know the swamps even half as well as the likes of Grandpa and his buddies. Lil John could be out there somewhere, gravely wounded, sheltering in the wreck of his pirogue as hungry gators circled him, and the only people in any position to help him were my grandpa and his fellow hunters. Grandpa told me that the more he thought about them, the more Mrs. Guidry's words made sense. He imagined being stuck out there, bleeding to death while the gators closed in, and how he'd be praying someone from town came looking for him. It wouldn't feel right going back into the swamps without a mind to look for Little John and his boys, even if it was just to bring home what was left of them. And so, one day, Grandpa met with Charlie and Whit at the Blind Tiger and put a proposition to them. They traveled deeper into the swamps than they ever had before to bring home some gator and maybe, just maybe, Little John Guidry along with them. Now, Grandpa and his buddies were faced with two very big challenges here. First off, heading out into the deeper parts of the swamp would require an overnight stay someplace, and it was in darkness that the hunters had the most to fear. Then secondly, they'd need the help of one or two extra hunting parties to cover all the ground they needed covering. Grandpa told Charlie and Whit to go get the supplies that they needed for this long trip into the bayou, while he went around trying to enlist the other hunting parties into joining them on the search. But just about everyone he spoke to thought he was crazy.
Circle, that's right.
While it was heartbreaking that Little John
Circle,
Guidry had gone missing, and while everyone felt sorry for his wife and kids, it was his own damn fault for heading too deep into the bayou, and all the while searching for a giant white alligator that may or may not have been something he made up. If a dozen more hunters went out there looking for him, in places that human beings did not belong, the most likely outcome was that more families would just end up wearing black. And just like Icarus, as they say, Little John flew a little too close to the sun and got his ass burned. Nobody's fault but his own. Grandpa said that he couldn't blame people for feeling that way. He even agreed with them to an extent, but there was still that voice in his head telling him he had to do something. He told me that he thought that voice was actually Jesus because he knew damned well how crazy of an idea it was, but he wanted to do it anyway. Yet as luck would have it, so did just one other hunting party. Gaston Dupree, or Gator to his friends, was one of the best hunters and trappers in the entire parish, but it was no secret that he was sweet on Little John's sister.
Guess we forgot to take their meds on time again. The alarm ring, turn off, take meds, watch when they got it's over. It's been over an hour, the med's just sitting there not eating. Why? Why? Your alarm rang immediately. Not scroll TikTok.
Grandpa said that first
you always do this.
They had to keep their eyes peeled for any trace of Little John and his boys, and they had a 14-mile stretch of river to cover before they reached Bayou Shin. He said it was very eerie out there that morning, the only sound being the putter of their pirogue's small engines as
okay, your alarm ring means you put everything down and you take the meds immediately.
Then, the water was black as oil, cypress trees stabbing up
down it with water,
wailing birds sounding like wandering spirits. You might spot a half-submerged log floating just a little too still until you realize it's no log at all, just another gator waiting patiently for its next meal. It can get very creepy out there when it's quiet and still like that, yet there was Grandpa, heading out into the bayou's deepest, darkest depths. The two hunting-turned-search parties arrived at Bayou Shin in the early afternoon. It was around there that Little John claimed to have seen his prize gator, so both parties figured it was a good place as any to start looking. They agreed to meet back up on the main body of the Chafalaya River in the morning, but until then, they were to split up and drive the pirogues up and down the narrow channels looking for any sign of Little John, his boys, or the remains of any other poor soul who had disappeared in the previous few months. To safely navigate the much narrower waterways, Grandpa and his buddies, Charlie and Whit, switched from their engine to their oars, paddling up and down Bayou Shin until their arms ached from it. They saw plenty of gators, swamp rats, and the occasional snapping turtle, but no sign of Little John or his hunting party. They searched all afternoon and well into the evening, Then, when the light started getting low, Grandpa and his two friends began looking for a house island dry enough to camp on. They continued up and down the channels, with the bayou getting darker and darker with each passing minute, until finally, they were forced to navigate by the light of nothing but their oil lanterns and the moon. Grandpa said that sort of navigation was very dangerous, mostly because the chances of wrecking your pirogue were much higher. And if you wrecked your pirogue way out in the deep swamps, you were in major trouble, even if you were a strong swimmer. And with that in mind, they paddled very slowly with Charlie at the head of the boat, lantern in hand, guiding them through the darkness. He couldn't hold it too far over the front, though, not unless he wanted his arm bitten off by a gator, and they knew that they were surrounded by them because they could see all of those eyes reflecting the orange glow of their lanterns. Grandpa always said that was the worst part of paddling through the swamps at night, seeing everything that was looking back at you. And although I've never seen the sight myself, just thinking about it sends a chill down my spine. After a while of searching for a place to camp, Grandpa said that he and his buddies started seeing lamplights in the distance. They figured that they might have happened across the camp of Gator Dupree and his boys, but as they got close, they realized someone had built some kind of structure way out there in the swamps. They paddled closer and closer, unsure of what to expect, and then suddenly, Grandpa said that he spotted a big black cross painted against a white background. It was a church, its rear on a house island, its front right up against the water, and it was deathly quiet. Grandpa and his boys pulled up to the landing, calling out to see if anyone was home, and a few seconds later, some old half-blind deacon emerged to welcome them. When they mentioned that they were looking for a place to stay, this deacon said that they were more than welcome to spend a few hours sleeping among the pews. Grandpa and his buddies thanked him, tied up their pirogue, and then piled into the tiny church to find a total of 4 pews lit by candlelight and an old rugged cross to the front. When the deacon asked them what they were doing out in the swamp so late at night, Grandpa shared the tale of Little John and their hopes of bringing him home alive. The deacon said he'd pray for the man's safe return, but when Grandpa mentioned the great white alligator Little John claimed to have seen, the deacon's expression, he says, turned cold. He told Grandpa he'd seen Old Red Eyes himself, up close too, and not only was it real, but it was the biggest damn gator he'd ever laid eyes on. He said he'd been out in his pirogue, sharing the good word with some of the swamp folk who lived out near Catahoula, and then while on his way back, he was paddling on a stretch of water when something huge and pale slipped out of the undergrowth to his rear and into the swamp. He said it was no use a thing that size trying to hide, and the almighty splash that it made as it slid into the water had him clutching at the crucifix that hung around his neck. And he started paddling like a madman.
I was supposed to take it immediately, but the meds that's on my table has finished, so I needed to take from the bigger pack in my drawer. I took it out of the drawer, then I got distracted with the TikToks.
And closer.
That's why I say you're supposed to take it immediately.
The had taken a deadly disliking to him, and if it snapped his pirogue in half, he was going to have to swim like the devil to safely reach solid ground. But then, right as the thing was about to reach him,
you're supposed to put everything aside.
The Lord is my shepherd.
To take it immediately.
He maketh me to lie down in green pastures, and he leadeth me beside still waters. The deacon said it seemed like the moment the words still waters left his lips, the bubbles stopped moving. He kept on paddling like his life depended on it, but the great white gator submerged beneath those waters, the one that had once seemed intent on making him dinner, had stopped dead in its tracks. Grandpa said his buddy, Whit Watson, told the deacon that, with all due respect, it was going to take more than prayers to bring in an animal of that size. And once again, the deacon turned white. Grandpa said the deacon lowered his voice and then told him to listen, and listen good. He then said that, sure, they were living and breathing. The devil moved among the bayou, and that he'd seen him with his own eyes, and that he moved through the beasts and the birds just the same as he did through people. He didn't know where Old Red Eyes was, nor did he know exactly what he was, but he had more chance of dragging us all down to hell than we did dragging him out of that swamp. His words didn't come off at all that kind, but the deacon meant them as a good-natured warning. An alligator that size and temperament wouldn't be brought down easy, and Grandpa was putting his life at risk just moving through its territory. But they hadn't paddled all that way just to turn around and head home, not when they were so close to the heart of the swamps. So, at dawn, once there was enough light to get going again, Grandpa and his buddies climbed back into their boat and then set off deeper into the bayou. Grandpa said it was still early in the morning and they were paddling slow while eating stale bread and molasses for breakfast when they suddenly heard a distant sound that chilled their blood. 1 minute, there was nothing but the low buzzing of bullfrogs, cicadas, and crickets coming from the underbrush, and then out of nowhere, there was the distant boom of a gunshot. It was just one at first, the kind of single large-caliber gunshot you hear when a trapped gator gets dispatched with a rifle. But then they heard 4 or 5 more pops way off in the distance, these smaller guns going off, only these sounded way more frantic, like something wasn't going to plan. Grandpa said he and his buddies started paddling like crazy in the direction of the gunshots, but soon they started to see some really big gators floating in the waters around their boat. Unlike the smaller juveniles and young adults in the outer swamps, these fully grown gators didn't much feel like moving out of the way. So rather than risk making them mad by bumping them with their boat, Grandpa and his buddies started taking things much slower, while having to pick their jaws up from the bottom of the boat at the sheer size of some of these things. He said there were some real monsters out there, the kind they'd usually have stopped and hunted before retreating out of danger. But on that occasion, they just kept paddling by, trying not to bother them, as they continued into the heart of the bayou. Grandpa said that they carried on paddling for about an hour, getting more and more nervous as they did, because if they strayed into any of the gators' spawning grounds, some overprotective mamas could cause them some real hassle. They're taking things real slow, keeping their eyes peeled and their mouths shut. Then at one point, they paddled around a wall of bald cypress trees and spotted something that almost turned their stomachs. Through a jagged clearing on the bank, they could see a campsite strewn with the blood-splattered remnants of Gator Dupree's hunting party. Grandpa said it was one of the most horrific sights that he'd ever seen. Guns and gear were scattered everywhere, an empty John boat still listed in the shadows, while half-eaten bodies lay among the sawgrass as flies buzzed over the carnage. There were limbs missing. Bodies had been ripped open with one man's boot sitting upright still laced like it had been yanked clean off, and it was the kind of mess no knife or gunshots leave behind. But if it was a gator that had made that mess, it must have been unusually big and very fast for an animal its size. Grandpa said that after seeing all those bodies, he and his boys started to discuss turning back, because if he, Charlie, and Whit went any deeper into the swamps, it might be their half-eaten bodies some horrified group of hunters would end up happening across in the future. Gator Dupree and his boys were much more experienced hunters than they were, and had traveled in larger numbers too. If they hadn't been able to best whatever had attacked them, what chance did Grandpa and his buddies have? Grandpa said that on the journey back, the weight of all that loss hung over them. They felt ashamed and defeated, but if they didn't return home, then who would provide for their families? Whit was up front paddling steadily when he suddenly pointed out a huge gator, easily 12 foot long, that was basking on a house island. Whit said that they thought it was the gator that killed Dupree and his crew. Charlie was skeptical and said just about any gator that size or bigger could have done it. Grandpa said he was about halfway through agreeing with Charlie when the murky waters in front of the 12-foot alligator
suddenly in my mind, I'm repeating the thing I need to do. I will still forget. That's normal, I think.
Nowhere,
that's, I don't think that's that normal.
From the depths of the swamp, pale as death, its reddish-pink eyes.
It's okay. I also forgot to bring tissues.
Down on the basking gator's head.
Hi, Nab.
With this disgusting
ads,
crunch.
so I don't think you can hear me.
The smaller gator thrashed wildly, whipping its tail and flailing its stunted limbs, but it was no match for this humongous beast that had somehow managed to take it completely by surprise. The albino gator then dragged it back into the swamp in a swirl of foam and blood, then swam off submerged before it was all still again. Whit's jaw was dropped as Charlie froze with the paddle mid-stroke. Grandpa said he was the same, still as a statue in the rocking boat, just staring at the ripples that thing left in its wake. Grandpa said there were a few moments of stunned silence, the boat rocking gently as the ripples slowly faded. But then suddenly, the water down the channel started to churn, and the next thing they knew, a huge blur of silt and pale hide was slicing through the swamp, coming at them so fast they barely had time to react. Grandpa paddled like the devil, while Whit fumbled with a shotgun, slamming shells into the breach, and he said he turned just as the beast erupted from the murky water, streaming off of its ghostly hide, teeth bared for the kill. As old Red Eyes surged upward, jaws gaping like an open grave, Whit fired twice. The blast echoed across the swamp as shotgun pellets tore into the albino's snout. Fresh, bright red blood streaked its scales, but the shots were only enough to daze it, and it sank beneath the surface.
Or did I splash with something else? I don't remember.
Grandpa said the boat suddenly lurched forward as the beast splashed down, and for a moment, he thought that they might be in the clear. But maybe a second or two later, he heard the same thrashing sound in the water behind them as old Red Eyes once again prepared to charge. Grandpa said his arms were burning by the time the water exploded again, but still he and Charlie rowed like the devil, willing each other to push harder, while at the rear of the boat, Whit held the shotgun with trembling hands and began praying out loud.
The banks is quite long.
"Where is my shepherd? I shall not want," he yelled as he reloaded. "He maketh me lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the path of righteousness. And though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for he..." Grandpa said Whit's final words were drowned out by another explosion of water. That albino beast lunged, jaws snapping inches from the boat's edge. But Whit's timing was right, and his aim was true. Grandpa said he heard a deafening roar as Whit unleashed another 2 shots, only this time, the pellets ripped through old Red Eye's flesh, causing dark red blood to gush into the foam. The beast thrashed,
also, hi, Ned.
bellow escaping its maw.
I don't think you heard me because it was ads just now.
Before slinking off back into the depths.
I think it should be around here-ish.
Grandpa and Charlie kept paddling, but except for the creak of the boat, the splashing of the oars and their ragged breaths, the bayou soon fell silent again. The boat glided through the swamp, their paddle strokes slow and heavy as they reached the next bayou, which would take them home again. Grandpa said he remembered how Whit sat up front, shotgun still across his lap, with a look of exhaustion and guilt across his face. He said that expression captured the mood. No bodies recovered, no closure to carry home, and they'd been lucky to escape with their lives. That sense of defeat made the journey back feel endless. They spoke little, their silence louder than words, dreading the shame of returning empty-handed to families who hoped for miracles. And the sun was setting by the time they reached the dock near where Rama stands today, and Grandpa and his buddies climbed out, legs very unsteady, and then they left their boat tied up as they walked on into town.
Sketch done.
First came the reunion, with parents, siblings, and kin of all kinds rushing forward. Whit's ma threw her arms around him, not caring that her boy smelled like sweat and swamp rot, while Charlie's baby sister clung to his leg and his pa praising Jesus for his safe return. And Grandpa remembered all of this, as well as his mother telling him how proud she was. It didn't matter that they'd return empty-handed. They tried, and that's what counted. Second came the bad news, delivered personally to the families of Gator Dupree and his boys. Gator's mama collapsed with a wail when Grandpa broke the news that her boy wasn't coming home, and that she would have taken a nasty tumble if she wasn't caught by Gator's 2 sisters. The same went for the families of his hunting party. The kin had gone out to rescue Little John and save his kinfolk from the agony of his loss. But in a horrible twist of fate, they too were now condemned to wear black. To Grandpa, it all seemed like some kind of sick cosmic joke, and he couldn't help but feel like he was the punchline. Why shouldn't he survive when so many had him? And how could he live with himself, knowing that he'd turn tail and run at the first sign of trouble? He said he struggled with thoughts like that for a long time, until the day of Little John's funeral, when his grieving widow told Grandpa how much she appreciated his efforts to recover her husband's body. Grandpa said that helped him deal with most of the guilt he felt, but not all of it, and he ended his gator hunting days for good after the encounter with Old Red Eyes. He traded the bayou for a cornfield, ended up catching the eye of that Boudreaux girl that I mentioned earlier. Then, after a long courtship, they were married under the cypress trees during the spring of 41. And sadly, the draft snatched him up in 42, and after storming through the liberation of France and helping free villages from Normandy to the Rhine, he returned to his beloved home and started a family. And years later, Grandpa would sit us by the fire in a low voice and tell us this exact story of his encounter with Old Red Eyes. But whenever he did, he'd swear to us kids that no battle ever chilled his blood like the day he and his boys stared into the crimson glare of the monstrous albino alligator who almost dragged them all to hell. In January of 1999, two brothers from South Florida, James and David Adams, ventured into the Big Cypress Swamp for what they expected to be a routine hunting trip. The Big Cypress, a sprawling wilderness of cypress strands, sawgrass marshes, and pine flatwoods, was familiar territory for the pair. So armed with rifles and riding an ATV, they drove out deep into the swamps to hunt deer and small game. But what began as a simple day trip spiraled into a 6-day nightmare that tested the limits of both their endurance and their sanity. Things started to go wrong when their ATV broke down deep in the swamp, miles from any dirt road or highway. To their horror, the usually reliable vehicle's engine suddenly sputtered out, leaving them stranded amid a labyrinth network of muddy waterways and dense vegetation. Back in the late 90s, cell phone reception in such remote areas was spotty at best, meaning it was impossible for the brothers to summon assistance. So instead of waiting around and hoping someone stumbled across them by chance, the Adams brothers decided to abandon the ATV and trek back on foot. They later said they assumed they could navigate using the sun, as well as their hard-worn instincts as seasoned outdoorsmen. But the swamp had other plans. In the days prior, heavy rains had swollen the swamp's waterways. Rising water levels erased familiar landmarks and turned even the driest patches of ground into quagmires of knee-deep sludge. The brothers tried their best to maintain both course and composure, but each soon realized that they were hopelessly lost. As dusk fell, the temperature plummeted, and in a rare cold snap for the usually balmy South Florida, that night's temperatures dipped into the 40s. Wearing only light hunting gear, James and David had no jackets or blankets to keep themselves warm, and instead huddled together under a cypress tree, shivering as the damp air seemed to seep into their bones. When darkness arrived, the swamp came alive with unsettling sounds. The brothers heard the guttural bellows of alligators, the rustle of skittering swamp rats, and the constant drip of the ever-rising water. James later recalled hearing a loud splash nearby. Convinced it was a gator sizing them up, he grabbed his rifle and tried to remain calm. But every snap of a twig sent spasms of fear through the brothers' guts as their minds raced with thoughts of what lurked in the dark. On the second day, hunger and thirst set in. The two brothers quickly ran out of what little food and water they brought along and, in desperation, resorted to sipping from pools of stagnant brown swamp water. They gagged at the taste of rotten decay, but knowing dehydration would kill them far quicker than any germ or parasite, they drank it all the same. As they walked, their boots grew heavy with mud and their legs ached from wading through the mire, Mosquitoes swarmed relentlessly, leaving welts on their exposed skin as they tried and failed to swat them away. At one point, David, the younger of the two brothers, started to exhibit signs of severe fatigue. James urged him on, but he too was beginning to falter. They needed a route out of the swamp, and they needed it soon. And on the third day, James and David stumbled across an old hunter's camp. It was little more than a rotting wooden platform half submerged in the water, and there were no supplies to be scavenged. But since it offered a brief respite from the endless sea of mud and slime, the two brothers decided to rest a while. They tried to start a fire with soggy twigs and a lighter James carried with him, but the damp wood refused to catch. They endured, but as darkness fell, so did the rains. That night, a storm rolled in, soaking them to the core and flooding their makeshift shelter. The rising water forced them back into the swamp, where they clung to tree roots to avoid being swept away. James later said that he thought they'd drown right there, swallowed by the swamp, and began doubting if they'd ever get out alive. On day 4, exhaustion and hypothermia began taking a brutal toll. The brothers' pace slowed to a crawl, with each step becoming a battle against both the sucking mud and their own failing bodies. David's lips turned blue, and he began mumbling incoherently as signs of delirium set in. His brother, terrified of losing him in the vastness of the swamp, tied their belts together in order to keep him close. They'd stopped talking about rescue. Survival was now about enduring from one hour to the next. And that night, they heard a helicopter in the distance. It was part of a search effort launched by their family after they failed to return. But to the brothers' horror and frustration, the swamp's canopy was too thick for the chopper to see them, and the sound faded away. Day 5 brought a dim flicker of hope. The brothers found a patch of higher and thus drier ground. Then, with trembling hands, they managed to spark a small fire using some grass and the last of James's lighter fluid. The smoke was thin, but they took turns feeding the fire, praying that it would be enough to draw the attention of search and rescue teams, because their time was running out. The brothers' bodies were breaking down. James's feet were raw from trench foot, and David was so weak he could barely stand. Both were gaunt, their faces hollowed out by hunger, and as the swamp began to sense their weakness, its wildlife grew bolder. James said at one point he spotted the eyes of what he could only assume was an alligator, reflecting the glow of their firelight. He aimed his rifle, readying himself for the beast to attack, but fortunately, it did not approach. On the morning of the 6th day, January 14th of 1999, a rescue helicopter finally spotted the brothers' faint smoke signal. The pilot, part of a coordinated search involving swamp buggies, airboats, and dozens of volunteers, hovered over the clearing as James waved weakly with tears of joy and relief streaming down his face. Ropes were dropped before medics hoisted the brothers aboard. They were skeletal, dehydrated and hypothermic, their core temperatures having dropped dangerously low. Paramedics wrapped them in blankets, using IVs to pump fluids into their veins as they were rushed to a hospital in nearby Naples. It was there that doctors marveled at their tale of survival. 6 days with no food, with only tainted water to drink, not to mention exposure to the elements in a swamp teeming with predators. All in all, it was nothing short of a miracle that the Addams brothers were still alive. James and David recovered physically, though the mental scars lingered. James later told reporters, "I thought we were gator food. Every night I heard them out there, waiting." Their story became a local legend, a testament to human resilience and a stark reminder of the Big Cypress Swamp's unforgiving nature. And for those 6 days, it wasn't just a landscape. It was a living, breathing adversary that almost claimed their lives. Tucked within the low-lying coastal plains of southeastern Virginia, the Great Dismal Swamp is a living labyrinth of towering bald trees emerging from murky, muddy pools. In ancient times, the peat-rich forests that surround the swamp were the favorite hunting grounds of the native Chesapeake and Nansemond tribes, who stalked deer, wild turkey, and feral hogs through black gum trees that turned a bright orange-pink in the fall, while more recently, the swamp served as a refuge for those escaping a life of slavery in the antebellum South. These days, the Great Dismal Swamp has been designated a national wildlife refuge, with contemporary conservation efforts ensuring a boom in the populations of black bears, bobcats, and otters, along with its 70 species of reptiles and amphibians, and its 213 varieties of birds. The swamp is even home to a few alligators, vagrants who swim up the Pasquotank River from the wetlands of North Carolina. But in the late 1980s, it played host to one of the most chilling criminal events of the decade. Thomas Lee Bonney was born and raised in Chesapeake, Virginia, and as a young man he established an auto salvage yard, which he grew into a very successful business. He married a woman named Dorothy May in the late 1960s. Then, in August of 1968, they welcomed the first of 6 children into the world, a girl named Kathy Carol Bonney. Thomas loved his daughter dearly, but Dorothy May soon noticed a certain overprotectiveness in her husband. He was both a religious and reasonable man, meaning his wife felt perfectly comfortable in confronting such behavior. But when she raised the issue, Thomas made a heart-rending confession. Although he didn't go into too much detail, Thomas explained that he'd grown up in the shadow of a deeply abusive father. He was neglected for long periods of time, and whenever his father was around, he'd subject his young son to severe physical abuse for even the most minor of infractions. Thomas told Dorothy May that he loved and despised his father with equal measure, and that he was terrified of making the same terrible mistakes. His wife assured him that together they'd ensure that didn't happen, but Thomas never quite rid himself of his overprotective instincts. Despite Thomas Bonney's overbearing supervision, or perhaps as a result of it, his daughter's teenage years were characterized by a growing spirit of rebelliousness. When he emphasized the importance of her education, she responded by dropping out of high school. Then, after he tried to enforce a so-called no-dating rule, a 19-year-old Kathy began an illicit affair with a married man more than 20 years her senior. Concerned by his daughter's behavior, Thomas searched her bedroom for signs of anything troubling, and in a desk drawer, he found a letter written by her much older paramour. It's believed this letter contained extremely graphic descriptions of illicit acts, and upon reading it, Thomas became incensed. He explained to Kathy that dating such a venally deranged individual wasn't safe, and that extramarital affairs either ended with heartbreak at best or violence at worst. Yet to his horror, his daughter refused to listen. Thomas was faced with every father's worst nightmare. He loved his daughter dearly, but her increasingly reckless behavior was putting her at risk in ways that was impossible for him to explain. Then, in late fall of 1987, Thomas Bonney's deepest and most primal fears became reality. On the morning of November 22nd, Thomas contacted the Chesapeake Police Department to file a missing persons report. He told them that the previous evening he'd driven his daughter to a nearby 7-Eleven to meet a man named John. According to Kathy, John wanted to sell his old Chevy Blazer, which, due to its age and heavy mileage, was being offered at a very reasonable price. Naturally, she wanted to give the SUV a test drive before handing over the cash and had agreed to meet its owner at the 7-Eleven parking lot at around 9 p.m. Thomas agreed to give Kathy a ride, but only if he could observe the meeting to ensure that it wasn't dating-related. His daughter seemed only too happy to let him witness the exchange, so off they went. Thomas then recalled how upon arriving at the 7-Eleven parking lot, he witnessed his daughter's meeting with the Chevy's owner, John. Kathy climbed into the SUV's driver's seat, took it for a spin around the parking lot, then handed over the cash once she was happy with its performance. Thomas said that he congratulated his daughter on the successful purchase of her first car. Then, in her excitement, she asked if she could take it for a spin before meeting him back home. Realizing that stifling one of his daughter's first major milestones would be stupid, the usually overprotective Thomas agreed to the proposal, but not without a warning to be home before midnight. Kathy agreed and climbed into the driver's seat of her brand new Chevy and then drove off with a toot of her horn. But upon waking up the following morning, Thomas discovered that neither his daughter nor her new car were anywhere to be found. Police told Thomas his fatherly concern was understandable, but in the eyes of the law, Kathy was an adult who was free to do as she pleased. Under the circumstances, a missing persons report could be filed after 24 hours without contact. Thomas tried waiting until the 9 p.m. deadline, but was so gripped with terror over his daughter's well-being that he called back just prior to 7 to express his anxiety. Then, and only then, was an officer dispatched to the Bonney family home. Upon the arrival of law enforcement, Thomas repeated his account of giving Kathy a ride to purchase the SUV. He believed that John, the vehicle's apparent owner, might somehow be involved in his daughter's disappearance. But given her newfound mobility, she could have driven just about anywhere before getting herself into trouble. Thomas also mentioned the extramarital affair Kathy had been conducting and how he believed the man in question was a dangerous deviant. Then, after sharing as much pertinent information as possible, the officer thanked Thomas for his time and then departed his residence. For Kathy's friend and family, the night of November 21st was a sleepless one. While many feared that driving at night on deserted Virginia highways had resulted in some kind of road accident, others suspected Kathy's recklessness had finally bore a terrible fruit. Yet the reality was much more horrifying. The following afternoon, a local hunter named James Sawyer was trudging along a heavily wooded area near the Great Dismal Swamp Canal when he made a deeply alarming discovery. A pair of blood-stained underwear was sitting near the water's edge, and just a few feet away, the naked body of an adult female was lying in a disturbingly unnatural position. Her torso was riddled with gunshot wounds, and she'd been so badly beaten that she could only be identified via fingerprints. Then and only then did police realize that the victim in question was the missing 19-year-old Kathy Bonney. A subsequent search of the teenager's bedroom revealed a half-finished letter to her married paramour, the contents of which had never been made public, along with some adult magazines and a pair of handcuffs. Thomas was devastated. He had long suspected that his daughter's older lover was priming her for deviancy, and the discovery of the handcuffs seemed only to confirm his worst fears. In light of that, his cooperation with detectives was enthusiastic to say the least, with Thomas giving hours upon hours of recorded interviews in the hopes that some minor detail would force a break in the case. Yet the more he talked, the more certain inconsistencies in his story became apparent. The first thing that aroused the detective's suspicion was the casual change of detail in Thomas's story. For weeks, he claimed to have driven his daughter to the test drive in his wrecker. Then one day, he suddenly claimed to have used a Chevrolet. Thomas also told detectives that in the weeks before his daughter's murder, he'd sold his 9-shot .22 revolver for $100. But when police asked the name of the person he'd sold it to, Thomas claimed that he couldn't remember. Detectives then spoke to Thomas's business partner, whom he operated the salvage yard with. In his experience, Thomas was an honest, hardworking, and deeply conscientious person, a man who made doing business with him a pleasure. But over the previous few weeks, he'd started noticing something strange. One day, Tom's partner approached him with a solution to an ongoing problem they'd been experiencing. He explained the situation, then laid out the proposed solution in as simple a manner as possible. Yet to his surprise, Thomas Bonney didn't seem to know what he was talking about. He remained quiet, maintained a confused, almost bewildered look about him. Then when his partner asked if he understood, Thomas replied with a nervous-sounding, "Yes, sir." Firstly, Thomas never, ever called his partner sir. The two weren't exactly close friends, but they'd been working together long enough to have developed a casual but trusting relationship. The most formal Thomas ever got was calling his partner by his first name, so where had the sir suddenly come from? Later that day, Thomas's business partner reapproached him regarding his potential solution just to make sure all had been understood. Thomas seemed to have returned to his composed and confident self, but to his partner's confusion, He claimed to have no recollection of the discussion regarding their problem. Assuming Thomas had been preoccupied and had not fully listened, his partner re-explained his proposal. Thomas understood perfectly, gave him the go-ahead, then concluded the discussion amicably. His partner was pleased, yet remained so unsettled regarding Thomas's apparent memory loss that it was one of the first things he mentioned when questioned by police. Detective soon turned to Kathy's siblings for answers, and in December of '87, they spoke to her younger sister. Susan Bonney claimed that despite his wholesome veneer, her paranoid control freak of a father was feared by all his children, but none more so than she. You see, it was her that had seen bloodstains in her father's Chevy on the same night Kathy was thought to have disappeared. It was her that had pretended not to see them, and it was her that prayed her father remained ignorant of her discovery. Not wishing to raise suspicion, detectives found a way of casually asking about the Chevy's whereabouts when Thomas told them he'd sold it in the days following his daughter's disappearance. They rushed to track it down, and in doing so, a terrible truth began to emerge. After seizing Thomas Bonney's Chevy from its new owner, forensic investigators conducted a thorough analysis of the suspect vehicle. They located the bloodstains Susan had referred to, along with long strands of hair in the vehicle's trunk, and then quickly determined both belonged to Kathy. It's not clear how Thomas Bonney got wind of the investigation's sudden shift, but on December 11th of 1987, he fled Chesapeake in the middle of the night. Dorothy May was so alarmed by some of the things her husband said and did as he packed up his car that she reported herself to the police that same day, claiming she couldn't protect herself or her children from a man she no longer recognized. The manhunt lasted 2 months. Then, on January 31st of 1988, Thomas Bonney was arrested in Indiana. Once back in Virginia and having been detained on suspicion of his daughter's disappearance, Thomas was interviewed extensively by psychologist Dr. Paul Dell. Using hypnotherapy, Dr. Dell was able to identify 10 separate personalities contained within Bonney's mind, leading the doctor to conclude that Thomas was one of the most profoundly deranged individuals he'd ever come across. Along with Tom, the so-called host personality, Dell identified personas named Satan, Mammy, Damien, Viking, Tommy, Hitman, Preacher, Dad, and finally, Kathy. These personas had been created by Thomas's psyche, with each serving as a conduit by which he could process the horrific abuses of his childhood, which were apparently far, far worse than anyone had been led to believe. Dr. Dell conducted extensive interviews with many of Thomas's split personalities, including one in which he claimed Kathy was still alive and visited him in his cell every night once the guards turned out the lights. Dr. Dell conducted extensive interviews with many of Thomas's split personalities, including one in which he claimed Kathy was still alive and visited him in his cell every night once the guards turned out the lights. In Dr. Dell's opinion, such prolonged interactions left him in no doubt whatsoever that Thomas was suffering from an acutely severe case of dissociative identity disorder, along with post-traumatic stress disorder and mixed personality disorder. Dr. Dell also claimed Thomas had extensively expanded on his childhood traumas, how his father had subjected him to unthinkable levels of emotional and physical torture, and that his issues surrounding control stemmed from the sudden and unexpected death of his grandmother when he was just 10 years old. However, at Thomas's trial, a prosecution-appointed psychiatrist contested Dell's diagnosis. Dr. Philip Coons had not interviewed Thomas personally, nor did he posit any official diagnoses. But after reviewing a whopping 13 hours of Dell's footage, he realized the doctor had almost completely failed to maintain proper standards of care. Not only was Dr. Dell's line of questioning unbefitting of a psychiatric interview, but he had allowed Bonney to ramble, asked him suggestive and leading questions, and had improperly suggested to Bonney that he might have other personalities while the patient was under hypnosis. What's more, Dr. Coons argued that the death of a family member was insufficient to induce dissociative identity disorder, then made the shocking claim that Thomas's symptoms might have actually been created by Dr. Dell's hypnosis. Dr. Kuhn's testimony was somewhat backed up by a physician who interacted with Thomas Bonney during treatment in October of 1988. This physician argued Thomas was indeed displaying symptoms consistent with Dr. Dell's diagnosis, but disagreed with the idea that Thomas had somehow blacked out while murdering Kathy, or was otherwise unaware of the severity of his acts. In summation, the prosecution's argument was as follows. On the night of Kathy's murder, it had in fact been Thomas Bonney's idea to go check out an SUV that was for sale, but the entire story had been nothing but a fabrication. It's clear the pair stopped by the 7-Eleven that Thomas spoke of, as Susan Bonney actually witnessed her father's vehicle pulling out of the lot. However, instead of taking Kathy to view a car, he drove her south.
Is it the whole emos or just couple numbers? This one is the whole set. So there's a lot I need to
Thomas
draw.
confronted his daughter regarding the extramarital affair that she was conducting. Then, when he was told to mind his own business, he pulled over, dragged her out of the car, then shot her to death at the side of the road. Then, to make it look as if she'd been killed by a lover, Thomas Bonney stripped Kathy of her bloodied clothes, made sure to leave her underwear clearly visible to anyone who might discover her, then beat his
Didn't you just open it? No, this one is Miference.
The impression her murder
the base is by Miference. It's not the one that I did the other time.
Bonnie's defense team announced that they agreed with almost half the prosecution's version of events. However, in their opinion,
that one not open yet.
In the heat of the moment, had reached for the firearm.
The one before, yeah. This one is Miference base. So there's this is base A,
struggle for Thomas's
and then they have a second base as well.
And this is when the persona known as Demian
I can't find it. I have too many emos.
To Demian, Kathy was not his child, merely a threat to be eliminated. Demian had
there's this one. This one is the second one.
It was the persona's one and only purpose, and protect him it did. 2 hours after murdering his own daughter, Tom returned home, and possibly owing to the condition diagnosed by Dr. Bell, he was able to look his wife dead in the eyes and ask with all sincerity, "Where's Kathy?" Bonnie's defense team made a compelling argument, but the jury disagreed, and following a 7-week trial, they pronounced him guilty on November 25th of 1988. Bonney appealed his life sentence, but the North Carolina Supreme Court upheld his conviction in June of 1991. On July 29th,
imagine if I ever get commissions that fast.
Bonney and a fellow
that one is a lot. Yeah, that one is 30. This one is 16. You know, it's like almost 50% lesser.
While it was initially speculated that both had been crushed to death in a trash compactor during their escape attempt, the two men had stolen a car and driven to Hampton Beach. Thankfully, Bonney was captured by police 4 days later and offered no resistance. He explained
I don't know why.
The escape had been a spontaneous idea,
but my hand is
and
trembling.
His main motivation had been to visit the grave of his late mother, whose funeral
why?
he was
Who
unable
knows?
to attend. He also said
I
he
didn't
wished to
use
visit the grave of
strength.
his
What?
daughter, Kathy, in order to offer an apology for his ultimate and unforgivable failure to protect her from himself. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday and Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, and there are super fun live streams on Sundays and Wednesday
From
nights.
what? From gaming?
If you've got a story, be sure to submit them.
Am I
over my
addicted to
email,
gaming?
letsreadsubmissions@gmail.com, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations.
I don't think I did anything that
or click that big join
causes the muscle in my hand to not
and
work with me right now.
where you can hear all of these stories in big compilations located anywhere you listen to podcasts.
Oh,
All links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends. And remember, speak to the cheeks.
It's trembling crazy hard. Maybe I should stop for today. What the hell?
After many years of hard work and study, I passed the
Oh,
California bar exam.
I didn't even do anything. I'm so confused.
It was incredibly tough. A grueling months-long marathon of stress, self-doubt, and all-night study sessions that sometimes felt more like a test of endurance and willpower than my accumulated legal knowledge.
Do some exercise? The last time I drew was 3 days ago.
Case law, statutes, and practice questions.
3 days.
And I put everything into
3 days.
Sessions, so
3-4 days. I don't know when the exact date is.
It was a moment of pure,
what?
unadulterated
Confused. Joy. It's okay.
And the next
at least we're working on things. At least I finished 2 things today. And I did 1 more sketch.
That would be a relatively simple process.
I'll stop here for today because trembling hands means I can't really draw. Then we'll continue this next time.
With family and friends,
hopefully I'll finish it really soon. Do some exercises. I don't know if exercises will help my trembling hand.
It was one of the
bye-bye.
Points of my entire life, but
see y'all next time. Bye-bye. Thanks for hanging out, as always. I don't know when the next time I will play games, okay? Because I wanna finish my commissions. So I think I will prioritize art compared to like gaming streams. So yeah, art streams for the next few times until I finish my to-do list. Okay, I shall go rest my hand. Jesus. Goodbye. Bye-bye.